On August 18, 2010, 30-year-old open water diver Ben McDaniel was last seen diving in the underwater cave at Vortex Spring in Ponce de Leon, Florida. 2 days later, when a worker at Vortex Spring noticed that Ben's truck was still in the parking lot, the Holmes County Sheriff's Office were called, and a recovery effort started. Despite nearly non-stop dives by more than 16 recovery divers over a 36-day period, no traces of Ben were ever found. Ben McDaniel was a thrill seeker and had a love for scuba diving from a young age. As such, he was a frequent face and well known at Vortex Spring. Right before his disappearance, Ben was on a sabbatical financed by his parents, recovering from a very difficult time in his life. Throughout his childhood, Ben and his brothers had a taste for adventure, namely diving, hiking, and mountain climbing. Ben's family come from the suburb just outside of Memphis, Tennessee, consisting of his mom Patty, dad Shelby, and brothers Tim, Paul, and half-brother Brad. Ben was especially close to his younger brother Paul, as they would normally go on outdoor adventures together. In early adulthood, Ben experienced a lot of success. He was charismatic and often described as the life of the party. Although young, Ben was driven and started a construction company. At a very young age, Ben had it all: a successful business, a wife, house, and overall, a very good life. Everything seemed to be falling into place, but being in construction, Ben was susceptible to the Great Recession of the late 2000s. During the recession, Ben's business started to really struggle. He was unable to get much business and had started to rely on loans. Compounding this issue was an employee of Ben's, who started working at the construction company and started siphoning off customers to his own fledgling construction business. This betrayal ended up being too much to weather, and Ben had to close the business. In the end, Ben owed the IRS around $50,000 in taxes. This added relentless stress to his life. His marriage, falling apart due to Ben's infidelity, ended in divorce, and he ended up having to sell his house to get rid of all of the debt he had accumulated trying to keep his business afloat. His life came to a low point in that very same year. On September 14, 2008, Ben and his youngest brother Paul had planned to go to a concert together. When Ben pulled up to his brother's place and went inside, he noticed that it was eerily quiet. He started calling out to Paul, but no one answered. He went into the bedroom and saw his youngest brother, the one he was closest with, lying on the bed, unresponsive. Ben quickly called an ambulance and Paul was hospitalized. At only 22 years old, Paul was diagnosed as having suffered a massive stroke. A few days later, the family decided to pull him off of life support, and when he passed away, they donated his organs to save more lives. They also started a foundation named the Paul McDaniel Foundation, which helps grieving parents. Ben and Paul were extremely close, and this, along with the other events of the year, greatly affected Ben. It was later revealed that Paul, like Ben, had been on antidepressants but died with unprescribed opiates in his blood. To this day, the McDaniel family denies that he died of an overdose. In order to help Ben try and get his life back on track, his parents offered him to take a 1-year sabbatical with their full emotional and financial support. They also let him stay in a condo that they owned in Florida's Emerald Coast. To get his well-being back in line, his parents also encouraged him to do what he loved, so he gravitated to his old love of diving. This was a pivotal moment in Ben's life, and that fact wasn't lost on him. The last time he went to visit his parents, he expressed his tremendous gratitude for their help, even reading a thank you letter he wrote for them. Returning to what he truly loved seemed to have done wonders for his mental health, but little did they know that they would never see their son again. Located just north of the town of Ponce de Leon, Florida, Vortex Spring is a popular recreational freshwater spring with beautiful crystal clear water and a gentle current, making it ideal for swimmers and divers, especially beginners. The cave itself is a natural spring, with water flowing out of the cave at a constant 20 degrees Celsius or 68 degrees Fahrenheit. It stretches 487 meters, almost perfectly horizontally into the earth, reaching a depth of around 52 meters or 170 feet deep. The spring is popular because of its large surface area. Vortex Spring starts with a large 60-meter bowl-shaped basin that's around 7.5 meters deep. It then opens to the cave entrance at a depth of around 35 meters or 117 feet deep. As you go from the cavern and into the cave, about 27 meters from the surface you'll be in the piano room, a brightly lit room with LED lights hanging on the ceiling. Swim another 6 meters and you'll eventually get to the locked gate, where you'll be greeted with a traditional Grim Reaper sign, telling inexperienced and experienced open water divers to go back, as there is nothing in the cave worth dying for. You must be fully cave certified to go into the cave. At this point, you will be inside of the entrance to the cave, as you will be far enough that there is no natural light penetration, and if it wasn't for the LED lights, it would be pitch black without a torch. Any untrained diver foolish enough to ignore the signs and go deeper into the cave, you technically won't be able to, as you need to be cave certified and provide that proof to the dive shop to get the gate unlocked and proceed to go deeper into the cave. Ben was not cave certified, but his dive logs confirmed he was regularly getting into the cave by going under the gate. This is a pivotal issue in the series of events to come. Vortex Spring was known as an ordinary but challenging cave, since at the time it was shaped like a long tube, with none of the intricate passages and smaller tunnels found in most caves. The cave was described as having one right-handed corkscrew-like twist and 4 major restrictions, with a 5th unmapped one. Restrictions are spots where divers won't be able to navigate to as normal. They would have to squeeze through to get to the other side, which is why divers would wear side mounts when diving at Vortex and other traditional mounted cylinders to better fit through those restrictions. And due to the restrictions, the cave wasn't meant for beginners. On Wednesday, August 18th, Ben McDaniel made the 45-minute trip to Vortex Spring from his condo on Florida's Emerald Coast. The temperature was around 90 degrees Fahrenheit, perfect for a day in the water. Ben had planned 3 separate dives on this hot summer day. Footage, which has yet to be released, showed Ben in the dive shop before heading out for the dives. Ben was able to make 2 separate dives before needing to refill his tank at the dive shop, and other divers at Vortex Spring noticed that Ben was spending most of his time testing out his equipment and taking notes in his dive log, as if he was planning a deeper dive. At around 6:30 p.m., Ben returned from filling up his tank for the final time. He got his cell phone from his car and called his mom. He talked to her for a bit before hanging up. That would be the last time his family would hear from him. Vortex Spring closes at 6 p.m. to the general public, but divers are allowed to be in the water at a much later time, with dive passes expiring at 11 p.m. At around 7:30 p.m., Ben went back into the water and began his 3rd and final dive. By all accounts, this time he would try and do a deep penetration dive, going all the way to the end of the cave. He traveled down to the opening of the cave and made his way past the cavern area and into the piano room, where Ben ran into 2 Vortex Springs employees exiting the cave. The employees would regularly go into the cave for maintenance, and with the help of an underwater vacuum, would try and remove as much silt as possible to keep the cave accessible, although they both said that on that day they were on a recreational dive. The 2 employees, Eduardo Taran and Chuck Cronin, knew Ben as he was a regular at Vortex Spring at that point, and they also knew that Ben was going into the cave even though he wasn't certified. Under a polygraph test, Eduardo later revealed to the police that even though he knew Ben was not a certified cave diver, both he and Chuck had suspected that Ben was breaking into the cave prior to the 18th, and decided it would be safer to let Ben in and give him more airtime to explore, rather than risking him getting stuck trying to jimmy his way through the gate. So Eduardo unlocked the gate and Ben went into the cave. That was the last time Ben McDaniel was seen alive. Eduardo and Chuck would usually stay in the area until the park closes in the evening, but this particular day, they had decided to head out with the knowledge that the owner of Vortex Spring, Lowell Kelly, was still in the area and staying late that night. On August 19th, the day after Ben had entered the cave, Eduardo arrived to work and noted that Ben's truck was still in the parking lot. Knowing that Ben liked to take advantage of the cheap 24-hour entry fee, it was normal to see his truck there for literally days at a time, as he would be one of the first to come and last to leave Vortex Spring. As noted by his girlfriend at the time, Emily Greer, Ben had done over 250 dives in the 4 months prior to his disappearance, so no alarm bells went off. On Friday, August 20th, 2 days after the disappearance of Ben, Eduardo again came to work, but noticed that Ben's car was still in the parking lot and in the exact same spot. This time, Eduardo started to worry. He went around and asked if anyone had seen Ben either yesterday or earlier that morning. When it started to become clear that no one had seen him since Wednesday, Eduardo quickly called the police to inform them that Ben may have had an accident in the cave. While waiting for police to arrive, Eduardo, being a fully cave-certified technical diver, was the first person to go into the cave in search of Ben. Being one of the original surveyors of the cave, his extensive knowledge of the cave, he wanted to locate Ben first in order to come up with a recovery plan. With Eduardo still underwater, the police finally showed up. While waiting for Eduardo to resurface, they contacted Ben's parents back in Tennessee to let them know of the situation. They also had to break the news to them that Ben, if he was still in the cave, had drowned. Once they were finished talking, Ben's parents, along with his girlfriend, quickly got into a car and made the 7-hour drive to Florida. Eduardo emerged from the depths of the cave empty-handed, having found no evidence of Ben in the cave. The police realized that none of the police divers had anywhere near the training or experience to go into the cave and attempt the search and recovery. The lead investigator assigned to Ben's case for Holmes County was Captain Harry Hamilton. Because of the technical aspect of doing a cave search and recovery, Captain Hamilton decided the police divers didn't have the correct training to try and complete this task. Because of how challenging the cave can be, with the added complexity of trying to find and recover a body, dive shop owner and experienced search and recovery diver Jeff Laughlin was brought on as the lead diver to assemble a team. Jeff had put out word that he was looking for recovery divers via local dive shops and was able to get enough divers to create 3 rotating teams, with 2, 3, and 4 divers to a team. Team 1 made the first push into the cave looking for Ben. Team 2 would then replace Team 1 as they pushed even further into the cave. And Team 3 was tasked with setting up the extra tanks the rescue team needed, as well as checking all of the shallower areas of the cave, including the basin. As each team surfaced, the next team would go down, each time coming up empty-handed. Ben's family was there throughout the entire search and recovery attempts. The divers would shine their lights into every crack and crevice in the cave, hoping to find any evidence of Ben, but nothing materialized. After several days of failed attempts at locating Ben's remains, some divers recommended that Holmes County contact Edd Sorenson, one of the top search and recovery divers in the world. At the time of the initial disappearance, Sorenson was out of the country on vacation in the Bahamas when he received the call. After getting the details, he ended his trip early as he wanted to help with the rescue, and with the information from fellow divers, he set out and got prepared for the dive at Vortex Spring. Sorenson was able to conserve energy through a large part of the cave with the help of an underwater scooter, a handheld device that propels you forward, and knowing the restrictions, Sorenson was equipped with smaller side-mounted tanks. Sorenson made it all the way to the end of Vortex Spring, around 200 feet more than any of the previous divers, and through the 5th restriction, needed to take off his tank, push them ahead of him, with his head sideways as he crawled through the restriction. He ended up in an area where there was no way to go forward. The only other passage was an extremely tight fissure at the end of the 4th restriction, to the left of the 5th restriction. Sorenson went to the fissure and stuck his flashlight into it to see if there was any way to get in. There wasn't. At the time, the 5th restriction and the end of the line fissure, as it became known, weren't on any map. Sorenson was the 3rd person to ever make it that far. He said the 2 divers who originally mapped the cave, Steve Keane and Eduardo Taran. Sorenson found no evidence in either the 5th restriction or the fissure that Ben or any other diver had been that far back, as there would have been scratches on the limestone and other physical evidence. A shovel was later found in the back of Vortex Spring, but it turned out to belong to the original survey team that first mapped the cave, although it was shown as belonging to Ben in the documentary Ben's Vortex by legendary diver Jill Heinerth. A video of Jill attempting to go into the fissure can also be seen in the documentary. She was unable to do so. If Ben had been able to make it through the 4th restriction and into the trash room, in theory a diver might be able to make it through the fissure as there seemed to be space on the other side. But considering how narrow it was, Sorenson surmised that if a diver managed to make it through to the other side or even attempt to do it, they would get permanently stuck and unable to come back out. This is the basis of a theory discussed in Ben's Vortex. The theory, which is more thoroughly fleshed out in the documentary, is that Ben made it past the fourth restriction, but considering he was using the wrong air, may have been under the effects of severe nitrogen narcosis. And in this state, Ben had probably lost track of time and started to run low on air. In a panic state, he may have been trying to exit the cave and went in through the fissure, where he ran out of air and drowned. While Ben wasn't a certified cave diver, he was side mount certified, which he used when diving at Vortex Spring. The rescue divers, including Sorenson, do not think this theory is plausible. For one, Ben was over 6 feet tall and around 210 pounds, and he also wore bulky equipment when diving, meaning many thought there was no way he would be able to make it through the fifth restriction, let alone the fissure. And point two, there was no evidence, absolutely zero, that Ben or anyone else for that matter had even made it that far back. Sorenson also pointed to the lack of marine life a decomposing body would attract, as evidence that Ben wasn't in the fissure. Due to the lack of evidence, Sorenson and the rest of the divers ended up concluding that Ben wasn't in the cave. Sorenson was quoted as saying, "I'm 99% sure he's not in that main passage, and I'm 99% sure he's not in that cave, period. He's just not there." After hearing the conclusion from the rescue team, and especially Edd Sorenson, Ben's parents were upset and very vocal with their opinion that Sorenson and the rescue crew were incorrect on their assessment. They were still 100% convinced that Ben was in the cave, and maybe even beyond the fissure. After Sorenson declared that he did not think Ben was in the cave, many of the recovery divers started dropping out for the search. When asked why the search was ending, lead rescue diver Jeff Laughlin said in an interview, "Everywhere I knew to look, I looked and didn't find him. This leads me to believe that he either met someone or met the wrong people and disappeared." Ben's parents, frustrated with the diver's conclusion, went to Holmes County Police Department and inquired about the possibility of using the remotely operated vehicle, or ROVE, in order to look into places the divers didn't fit or refused to go. The Holmes County PD considered this option, but were concerned about losing the expensive piece of vital equipment. So the Holmes County PD agreed to use the ROVE in the cave on the condition that the McDaniels will guarantee its replacement. Even with the $54,000 price tag, the McDaniels agreed. Deputy Sam Lipinski was tasked with operating the ROVE using a joystick and TV screen. The ROVE was taken into the cave, but was unable to go further than any of the divers because the cable attached to it started to get stuck and started weighing down the ROVE. And the ROVE itself also started getting stuck in some of the restrictions. Much like how each team of recovery divers trying to find Ben in the cave came up empty, the search above the surface also raised more questions than answers. Investigators combed through the grounds of Vortex Spring with search dogs, teams mounted on horses, on foot, and they even utilized a helicopter. They searched the above-ground areas near the cave entrance, near Ben's truck, the buildings, the woods, and the spring runoff. Several cadaver dogs and tracking dogs were brought in to search near the water, buildings, camping grounds, and woods of Vortex Spring. According to Ben's dad Shelby, one dog hit on the surface of the water, jumped in, and started swimming towards the cave entrance. The handler told Shelby that it was very unusual for the dog to jump into the water, which Ben's family thought was strong evidence for Ben being in the cave. However, there were some opposing statements on what type of training the dogs had, or if the dog was allergic to decomposition or not. One of the recovery divers, an experienced and reputable diver by the name of Kevin Carlisle, later got into a bit of an argument with Shelby online on whether the dog brought in were qualified specifically for water detection or not. Kevin stated that the recovery divers gave the family and investigators information for a well-trusted set of dogs with no proper water training, but another group was brought in, potentially because they could come sooner than the vetted group. Water samples from the spring were also tested by the state and county health department. All of the samples came back negative. Ben's black pickup truck was searched by police. It was found locked, nothing in the truck was out of place, and inside the truck they found Ben's phone, wallet, and $1,100 in cash. They found nothing that suggested foul play, so people started pointing to this as proof that Ben didn't just up and leave the cave, and that he's still inside. Back home, Ben's bedroom was filled with different types of diving books. The books covered a wide range of topics including technical diving, recreational diving, and cave diving. While it looked like Ben was striving to become knowledgeable at technical and cave diving, books and courses are not an adequate substitute for real-life training with a certified cave instructor. Another piece of evidence that Ben was still in the cave was the fact that when local investigators went to Ben's apartment, Ben's dog Spooner was still there, hungry and dehydrated. According to people close to Ben, Ben loved his dog and would never intentionally abandon Spooner, who was a rescue. Also found in his home was a very detailed map of Vortex Spring, along with dive notes, calculations, and an extensive dive log that suggested Ben had made it to the very end of the spring before. To some, the dive log, along with the evidence in the truck, meant that the possibility that Ben might be inside the cave couldn't be denied. The first signs of physical evidence found were 3 stage tanks that were in odd, if not suspicious, locations. Stage tanks are extra tanks of air that cave divers bring on very long, deep penetration dives to make sure they have enough air, and also the right kind of air for deco or decompression. The issue of these tanks, which has Ben name written on them, is that they were in no condition to be used and were in bizarre locations. One was found near the cave entrance and 2 in the basin. In normal circumstances, the divers would stage the tanks inside of the cave, or have just one tank near the cave entrance or in the basin for the last deco stop. Also, the conditions of the tanks was confusing. The tank that was found near the entrance of the cave was the newest of the 3. It was a green tank with a sticker that read nitrox on the side, a diver down sticker next to it, a full black regulator set with yellow hoses, a yoke valve, and has Ben contact details written on it. Tank number 1 was in the best condition as it was basically full, contained nitrox, a special air mix with oxygen levels up to 36%, which this tank had, although it was not the right mix for this cave. It was found around 60 meters or 200 feet into the entrance of the cave. Tanks number 2 and number 3 were found in the basin in approximately 7.5 meters or 25 feet of water. Tank number 2 was red, with the same nitrox sticker but with only a partially functioning yoke valve and no regulator. As any diver knows, changing regulators while also changing a tank is not something most divers ever do. Also, despite the sticker, this tank wasn't nitrox. It had just regular air and this tank was only about halfway full. Tank number 3 is where things get really weird. Tank number 3 was a dulled, almost faded silver color, again with the same nitrox sticker as the previous 2. But unlike the previous 2, tank number 3 had no strapping, a broken yoke valve, and no regulator. The tank had so little air it was considered empty. Both tank number 2 and number 3 were found chained to the talk box in the basin of Vortex Spring, a considerable distance away from the cave's entrance. This had led to some of the rescue divers concluding that the placement and conditions of the tanks looked suspiciously like a setup, since even an inexperienced diver wouldn't dive with the cylinders in those conditions, and had placed them more strategically inside of the cave for decompression purposes, not outside in the basin. Another suspicious issue is that he planned a long dive around 5 to 6 hours and didn't have the proper air for that type of technical dive. In the opinion of the rescue divers, nothing about this added up. On Tuesday, April 12, after disagreeing with the conclusion of the rescue divers, the McDaniel family put out a reward of $15,000 to anyone who would go into the cave and find Ben. They ended up putting out the reward on Facebook. The reward was later increased to $30,000. One diver foolishly tried to go in after the reward after it was raised to $30,000, and it cost him his life. Larry Lee Higginbottom, a retired U.S. Marine, arrived at Vortex Spring on March 17, 2012. It was a beautiful Saturday morning, and at 10:45 on the dot, Larry went into the water. When he didn't return that evening, his girlfriend got worried and contacted Vortex Springs management, who in turn contacted the Holmes County Sheriff's Office. After several failed attempts, his body was recovered the following day by Edd Sorenson. He had drowned near the back of the cave. In the original, now deleted post for the reward, Ben's father Shelby went on to say that they were looking for fearless divers, which many took as a shot to the rescue divers who concluded he wasn't in the cave. He later apologized for the comment and said that he meant advanced divers. Cave diving friends of Larry said that he was closely following the Ben McDaniel case and decided to try and find him when the reward was raised to $30,000. With this new information, the diving community was outraged, especially cave divers who had already eviscerated Ben for his decision to go into the cave at Vortex Spring without being certified. The reward offered by the parents was seen as a terrible idea, since it was putting less experienced divers at risk by going into the cave for money. After all the backlash, the McDaniels rescinded the reward. Although that didn't stop the McDaniels from being vocal. Ben's mom, Patty, was quoted as saying, "I think Eduardo killed Ben," although this allegation was never substantiated. Ben's parents at one point were convinced that Ben had been murdered and hired Florida-based PI Lynn Marie Carty. She investigated Vortex Spring and found background issues on multiple employees, but the biggest red flag was on the actual owner of the spring, Lowell Kelly. When the news of the disappearance first became public, Kelly was interviewed by local media about what happened. Kelly stated that he also does not believe Ben is in Vortex Spring. He went so far as to say, "In my heart, I feel that Ben did not perish at Vortex Spring." During her investigation, Carty found that Kelly had been charged with driving an ex-employee into the woods where he accused the employee of stealing money before beating him with a baseball bat. The employee was able to get away from the attack and said that if he didn't escape, there was no doubt in his mind that Kelly would have killed him. Kelly was still facing charges from that incident at the time of Ben's disappearance. When Kelly first met Ben had introduced himself as a cave diving instructor, almost bragging about it. Kelly also said that it seems like Ben was a show-off, and during questioning by police, Kelly admitted to potentially seeing Ben the night of his disappearance. Kelly is usually gone by late afternoon, but this was one of the rare nights where he stayed to oversee the spring. He stated that on the night that Ben disappeared, a man, around 35 years old, and looked like Ben, went up to him while drunk and asked to go into the cave. Considering the person's state, he refused and sent the person away without thinking much about it. Lynn Marie Carty was 100% convinced that Lowell Kelly and Eduardo Taran either killed Ben and hid his body, or more likely Ben died and they removed his body from the cave. Kelly denied having anything to do with Ben's disappearance. But this is where the story truly takes a strange turn. In December of 2011, Kelly was found unresponsive in a bathtub, taken to a hospital where he later died under what was considered mysterious circumstances. He had thrown a chili cook-off on the property of Vortex Spring. It was reported that Kelly had a few drinks and later that night fell down some stairs and suffered a concussion. He was later taken to a home in Ponce de Leon by two unknown people, where he was helped showered and stayed in the bath overnight, covered with a blanket. During the night, his condition took a turn for the worse. Police were called and he was sent to the hospital where he stayed until he died on January 20, 2012. The Holmes County Sheriff's Office said little about the incident. They refused to release the full autopsy report, and even when the official autopsy revealed that Kelly died from blunt force trauma to the head, the Holmes County Sheriff's Office never revealed who the home belonged to or the identity of the people who helped Kelly that night. They said it was due to an ongoing investigation. To this day, the details of what happened that night have never been fully revealed. There have been more than a few documentaries and videos on this incident, but it still remains an unsolved mystery. The Holmes County Sheriff's Office still has Ben as a missing person due to the fact that there was evidence he entered the cave, but none that he came out. To this day, the McDaniel family believe that Ben is inside of Vortex Spring, somewhere inside of the fissure at the back of the cave. And although thousands of people dive in Vortex Spring every year, no other evidence of Ben being in the cave has ever been found. Thank you for watching.
The closest I could get basically was just seeing his two feet kind of eaten up by that little crevice. You know, I couldn't see his body at all.
On November 24th, 2009, John, his brother Josh, and 11 friends would go into Nutty Putty Cave located west of Utah Lake. It was supposed to be a relaxing excursion into a new cave. What proceeded to happen would turn out to be one of the most extensive rescue attempts in caving history. This is the infamous story of John Edward Jones and the Nutty Putty Cave.
Want to have the family have a chance to talk to him, sort of boost his spirits a bit.
John Edward Jones was an experienced caver. Having grown up in Utah, John, now 26, was no stranger to caving. John's father Leon took him and his younger brother Josh on caving trips all over the state. Josh, 23, wasn't his only brother. John was born into a big family consisting of 5 boys and 2 girls. John was also a devout Christian and an active member of the Church of Latter-day Saints, having served the mission for the church in Ecuador. John had graduated from BYU, where he met his wife, Emily. They were married in 2006. At the time of the accident, John was studying to be a pediatric cardiologist at the University of Virginia, where he lived with his wife and 13-month-old daughter, Lizzie. Emily and John were expecting their second child next June. John planned a trip to go back home to Utah to visit his family for Thanksgiving. After hearing that his brother is coming to visit, Josh planned an excursion to a cave. He made reservations for himself, his brother, and 11 friends. The cave was Nutty Putty, which they had never been to before.
Still far from being a recovery, it's a rescue. But the longer it goes, obviously, the more concern there is.
Nutty Putty Cave is a hydrothermal cave located west of Utah Lake and about 55 miles south of Salt Lake City. A caver by the name of Dale Green discovered Nutty Putty in 1960. He entered the cave and noted the most recognizable aspect of the cave, the brownish clay-like walls that lined the 1,400-foot or 427-meter cave. It stayed at around 60 degrees Fahrenheit or 15 degrees Celsius year-round, although the temperature dropped the deeper you got in, and due to the hydrothermal activity, the cave was extremely humid. Nutty Putty turned out to be a local favorite, attracting an estimated 5,000 visitors a year. But with its tight and narrow passages, stories of people getting stuck in the cave and needing rescue started to appear. From 1960 to 2004, 6 different people became stuck and required rescue in some of Nutty Putty's narrow passages. There's a reason why 3 of the cave's tightest squeezes are called the Helmet Eater, the Scout Eater, and the Birth Canal. In 1999, 2 Boy Scouts, both 17 years old, got stuck in the Birth Canal section of Nutty Putty. Rescue workers were able to free them 12 hours later. Another case involved a 16-year-old boy by the name of Brock Clark. This is an interesting case, as it seems like Clark may have gotten stuck in the exact same tunnel that John crawled into. At around 4 p.m. on August 21st, 2004, Brock and a few friends went into Nutty Putty when he found a small opening deep inside the cave. He started crawling through the passage until he got to a part that seems to descend. As he peered over the edge, he slipped and started to fall, ending up upside down. He got wedged inside a crevice. It took rescuers 14 hours, but they were able to get him out of the cave. All 6 of those trapped cavers had made it out alive, but due to the recent tragic drowning deaths of 4 people in the nearby cave on White Mountain, the local sheriff's office grew tired of having to perform rescues in the cave and worried that some would turn fatal. Nutty Putty Cave was closed in 2006 due to safety concerns. It was reopened on May 18, 2009, only 6 months before John entered the cave. After reopening, some changes were made when visiting the cave. A registration system had been put in place to increase safety and cut down on accidents. Groups would have to pre-book a visit to the cave online, so that management could control the number of people in the cave and avoid overcrowding. Although precautions were taken, the cave system still had unmapped sections. This would be a critical issue in the series of events to come.
He worked himself face forward through a series of tight passes.
On November 24, 2009, the brothers Josh and John decided to rekindle their love for caving, and with 11 other friends and families made their way to the location of the cave. Located just south of Salt Lake City, the location of the cave was barren and unspectacular. Sitting on a hill, the cave's entrance is a small hole located in a small pit. The entrance is 6 feet in diameter and drops down 15 feet. Climb to the bottom of the entrance and you'll need to crawl into a 2-foot opening. You'll then crawl for 20 feet, where the cave will open into the main chamber. At around 8 p.m., the group made it down and into the cave. They made their way to a large chamber named the Big Slide. John and the others split up to find the birth canal. and that's when he stumbled on a waist-high entrance to a tight passage. John wore a 1970s-style rainbow headlamp his father had bought him for caving trips they used to go to when he was young. John stuck his head inside the entrance, thinking he found the birth canal. Instead of waiting for his brother to come back, John decided to go into the passage as he wanted to be the first to try and make it all the way down. He started crawling into the tunnel, pushing himself with his hand and feet, but it seemed way too tight. John stopped and tried to turn around, but was unable to do so. So he kept going, thinking that it was the beginning of the birth canal and it would eventually open up. John saw a tight restriction and wiggled his body through it. He kept going until he noticed a fissure at the bottom that dropped nearly straight down. He started crawling into it, thinking it'll widen out at the bottom. To get through the restriction, rescuers believed that John sucked in his chest, sliding his torso over the lip of the rock and down the 10 by 18-inch wide crevice. But when he gasped for air, his chest expanded again and he got stuck with one arm pinned underneath him and the other forced backwards. The rainbow headlamp had fallen off. The size of the crevice he was stuck in is comparable to the opening of a front-loading washing machine, except it was in a perfect circle and he was stuck in the tightest part of the opening, trapped more than 100 feet or 30 meters below the ground, and 400 feet or 120 meters from the cave's entrance. He tried to wiggle himself free but was sent deeper into the fissure. Thinking he just needed to push through, he sucked in his chest again and slipped further down the crevice until his hand hit a wall. With the dust clearing while trying to get his bearings, John looked and saw that there was no way to move forward. He had crawled into a dead end. John had unknowingly gone into an unmapped passage of the cave, close to Edd's push. That section remained unmapped due to the passages being too narrow to safely explore. Being an experienced caver, when John realized he was stuck, he remained calm and tried to crawl back up the way he came. But being almost vertically upside down, this proved to be a monumental task. As the realization of his situation started to set in, John started to call out for his brother, hoping he was still around. Josh heard his brother but had trouble finding him. He looked at the narrow passage to his left and realized it was coming from there. As he crawled to his brother between the tight and muddy walls, he knew it was serious. When he reached the restriction, he tried to go in but got stuck himself. John told his brother not to go any further so that they didn't both end up stuck in the crevice. The two devoutly Mormon brothers prayed together before Josh got out of the tunnel and went back in, feet first, and attempted to pull John from the crevice by wrapping his legs around him. As Josh pulled up, John's body inched up just a bit, but he slipped right back down as soon as Josh released him. Having run out of options, Josh and John decided it was best for Josh to leave the cave and get help. Josh was quoted as saying, "I didn't want to leave him. His life was in that cave, in that little crack." Josh made it out of the cave and on the surface called 911. After the call, knowing help was on the way, Josh made his way back down to be with his brother. The two made small talk, waiting for the rescue team to arrive. What came next was a 28-hour ordeal that involved around 130 rescuers working around the clock trying to free John from the grasp of the cave. It's still known as one of the most famous cave rescue attempts in caving history.
Being stuck in that position for going on 23 hours now makes it very difficult for him.
After nearly an hour, Josh was informed that the rescue team was on the surface and near the cave's entrance. He went up to find them. Back on top, an experienced team of rescue workers planned the extraction of John from the cave. The first rescue worker to reach John was Susie Motola, a search and rescue volunteer with vast caving experience. She made her way to Nutty Putty after receiving news of John's situation around 9 p.m. She had begun moving into a new house, but dropped everything when the pager went off. She arrived at the location, and after being briefed, she began her descent into the cave, with two other rescuers behind her. Standing at only 5'3", she crawled down the cave for about 30 minutes before finally reaching the tunnel where John was stuck at around 12:30 in the morning. By this point, John had been stuck for 3 hours. With the rope around her ankle, Susie went into the entrance, falling on her belly as she inched her way through the cramped tunnel. 20 minutes passed before the beam of her headlamp fell upon a pair of navy and black running shoes sticking out of the crevice. Susie started talking to John. She said, "Hi John, my name is Susie. How's it going?" John replied, "Hi Susie, thanks for coming, but I really want to get out." To which Susie replied, "Oh, no worries John. You're going to get out of here, lickety-split." Back on the surface, the team was still trying to figure out how to safely get John out. Among them was trauma physician Doug Murdoch. When Dr. Murdoch was informed that John was in a nearly vertical position at around 70 degrees and upside down, He knew that John didn't have much time. Dr. Murdoch was quoted as saying, "Being upside down, your body has to pump the blood out of the brain all the time. Your body isn't set up to do that. The entire system starts to fail." He knew that blood and other fluids would start pooling in John's brain and lungs. His circulation would start to slow, with toxins building up in his blood. If the rescuers were to free John, those toxins could rush to his heart and kill him. He could also experience cardiac arrest or hemorrhaging of the brain. Dr. Murdoch gave John 10 hours to live. Inside the tunnel, Susie was also trying to figure out how to get John out. She cut the upper part of his jeans to free up some space. She then tied a rope around his legs close to his feet that stretched back to the rest of the team waiting at the tunnel's entrance. Once the rope was fastened, Susie gave the signal and the team pulled, but they didn't have close to enough leverage to move John. Susie and John passed the time with small talk as the other rescue workers tried to come up with another plan. But as he talked, she noticed that his voice grew more nasal and his breathing labored. You could tell his lungs were filling with fluid. After 2 hours, Susie was out of ideas and began the slow crawl out of the tunnel, with another rescuer taking her place. As the hours passed, rescuers arrived from different parts of Utah, and a camp was set up as a command center near the entrance to the cave. Everything from explosives to lathering John with vegetable oil was thrown around, but they were quickly shot down. Emily, John's wife, had spent the entire night of the 24th waiting by the phone, hoping that she'll receive a call that John was free. Emily knew how persistent her husband of 3.5 years could be. On the morning of the 25th, Emily couldn't wait and drove to the cave with Lizzie and John's parents in tow. She couldn't believe her eyes when she arrived at the site. There were over 100 people at that point, with the site littered with cars, fire trucks, ambulances, and police SUVs. Emily was quoted as saying, "I knew I couldn't do anything to help, but I really wanted to give him a hug when he got out. I just imagined him being really tired and scared." When the family arrived, they met with Utah County Sheriff's Lieutenant Tom Hodgson. Emily remembered the lieutenant fighting back tears as he spoke, which confused her. But Tom remembered years ago, the 16-year-old boy who got stuck in a similar tunnel to the one that trapped John. A pulley system was used to free the 5'7" teen, but John was much bigger. But that same system would be used to try and get John out of the cave.
There's an incredible sense of disappointment and discouragement about that having happened, because they know that it was hard to get him to that point, and getting him back to that point again would be a real effort again.
When John heard the drills, he asked what was going on and was told that a pulley system was being installed into the walls of the cave in the hopes to free him. Each anchor, which was designed to fit onto the surface of hard solid rock, were drilled throughout the tunnel and the cave. Each time they added a pulley, they tried the system, but each time the friction was still too strong. As the team added pulleys, John's body inched out of the crevice bit by bit. They were able to lift John so far up that his feet touched the low-hanging ceiling. With his heart struggling to pump blood into his legs, this caused John to scream in pain. This made the rescue workers come to a horrible realization that due to the angle of the tunnel, he wouldn't be able to bend his legs. They considered breaking John's legs to get him out, but were advised against it, as in his weakened state, he wouldn't be able to be sedated and the shock would likely kill him. Back on the surface, Ryan Shorts prepared to make the trek down to John. Ryan was young, but an experienced caver, having spent most of his childhood exploring caves. His father helped found the Utah Cave Rescue. So Ryan, even at 6'1", was seemingly immune to claustrophobia, as he loved the challenges caves gave him. When he reached the tunnel that led to John, however, some fear did creep in. Ryan readied himself, entered the tunnel, and started making his way to John. When Ryan reached John, at first they made small talk, and Ryan could tell that John was starting to lose touch with reality. John would periodically go from calm to thrashing around, trying to get out. Ryan recounted that when he first arrived, John had told him, "Help me get out, I don't want to be on my head." Ryan replied, "Why are you on your head?" To which John replied, "Why did you guys put me here?" Ryan tried to get John to calm down. Ryan found that the best way to get John to calm down was by asking John questions about his family. John would go on to tell Ryan about his family, about his wife and daughter and their life in Virginia. John had also told Ryan that Emily was pregnant. The baby was due on Ryan's birthday, June 13th. At one point, John told Ryan, "I'm sorry I'm so fat. It would be so much easier for you guys to get me out of here if I wasn't so fat." All Ryan could do was smile and say, "Well, when we get out of here, I'll be your workout buddy." Knowing how much John was thinking about his family, the rescue team brought in a set of radios that were connected via a cable line. They ran the line all the way down to where John was, and then gave the speaker to Ryan, who stretched his arms out so that John could listen. John heard Emily's voice through the speaker, saying that she loved him and to keep fighting. This made John start yelling that he loves her and that he'll make it out. During Ryan's time with John, a new pulley system was getting installed. Due to the soft nature of the walls in the cave, some of the anchors were beginning to get loose. The rescue workers were able to finish the new pulley system at around 4 p.m. on the 25th. By this point, John had been trapped upside down for 19 hours, but it seemed like they would be able to finally get him out. They ran the rope through nearly 15 pulleys. Closest to John, the rope was strung through a natural stone arch just above his feet. Ryan tried to make John ready for what's about to happen. At the end of the rope, the rescuers were desperately waiting for Ryan to give them the signal. He did. They started to pull, and with each pull they raised him up, inch by inch. When his feet hit the ceiling, John once again screamed in pain. Ryan yelled for them to lower him a bit to give him a breather. When they lifted him back up, Ryan stuck his head into the crevice and looked down, giving John his first glimpse of another person in nearly a day. Ryan asked John to look up and ask how he was doing. John's muddied face looked up, the bloodshot eyes meeting Ryan's, and he replied, "It sucks. I'm upside down. I can't believe I'm upside down." But then he smiled and said, "My legs are killing me." They let him back down one more time. After 20 minutes, it was time to try again. Ryan yelled for the team to pull, and John once again inched up. Ryan began to hope, as did the rest of the team. John would require intensive care, but he would be free. He would be able to hug his wife and watch the birth of his baby. Suddenly, a loud shuddering noise filled the cave. When Ryan came to, he was confused as to what happened, but he noticed blood and realized it was his. He tried to speak, but it felt like his jaw was broken. The natural arch above John's feet gave way and shattered under the pressure of John's body, sending a heavy-duty carabiner straight at Ryan's face. When Ryan peered back into the crevice, he saw that John had slipped right back into the same spot. Ryan spoke to John for the last time, with blood gushing from his mouth. He said, "John, I'm bleeding. I've got to get out. But it's okay. Everything's okay. Someone will come in to be with you." When the rope went slack, the 8 people pulling the rope fell to the ground. Ryan's father, Dave, was among those who fell. When he saw his son come out, he worried that Ryan may have had a serious injury. After getting medical treatment, Ryan told his father that the tunnel was still accessible and that it was okay to go back in. Reluctantly, Dave crawled in. Dave got close to John and asked if John was okay. John replied, "I'm going to die here. I'm not going to come out of here, am I?" To which Dave replied, "We're going to get you out." John would ask about Ryan. "Is he okay? I think he's hurt really bad." That would be the last thing John Edward Jones would say. Shortly after that, John fell silent and his breathing slowed. Noticing this, Dave went deeper into the crevice and tried to wrap a rope around John's waist, but it was just way too tight to work it all the way around. He asked if John could suck in his stomach, but John didn't reply. Dave tried to make his way back up, but realized he was now stuck. It took him 15 minutes to be able to finally crawl back out. This exhausted Dave, so he started making his way back out of the tunnel before going to the surface. Once back up, Dave pulled Lieutenant Hodgson aside and told him, "He's dying right now. He has a heartbeat, but he's had difficulty breathing before I got there. You can't get someone down there before he dies." But Tom remembered his earlier promise to John's family and still wanted to try and rescue John. A member of Utah Cave Rescue, Brandon Koalis, was sent down to check on John. He brought a telecom so Emily can talk to him. Emily told John, "I know you've been pushing so hard for so long, but don't you rest for a minute and take a break, and then you can push again." She was still convinced that John would get out, while Emily's voice could once again be heard echoing through the cave. This time, John didn't respond. Brandon said by this point, John was already unconscious. He never woke up. A rescuer with medical training crawled into the tunnel, and at 11:56 p.m. on November 25th, John Edward Jones was pronounced dead.
In Utah tonight, authorities are considering shutting down a popular destination for adventurers. It's a cave which has now been declared a public hazard after a young father died inside.
Lieutenant Hodgson never made a promise he couldn't keep. This time would be different. Due to the danger that extracting John's body would impose on the rescuers, Tom had to make a call he wishes he didn't have to. He called John's family to tell them his team wouldn't be able to get John's body out of the cave. Tom said to make that phone call on Thanksgiving morning to a family that is hopeful you'll be able to bring their son out and they'll get some closure. It wasn't an easy call to make, even though the family protested at first, wanting to give John a proper burial. They understood the dangers of the extraction and agreed to leave his body in the cave. against protests from caving organizations throughout Utah. The cave was then sealed a few weeks later. Cement was poured down the entrance, with John's body still trapped in the crevice. The rescue workers were trying so hard to get him out of. A memorial plaque was placed at the entrance of the cave to commemorate John's life and the rescue attempt. After the passing of John, Emily went back to Virginia. On the 15th of June, their baby was born. She named him John. Thank you for watching. On Monday, May 26, 1973, a group of 9 friends made plans to enter a flooded sinkhole simply known as the Shaft, in what's known as one of the worst diving accidents in the country's history. 8 divers would enter the water for a recreational dive, but only 4 of them would come out. Located in South Australia, Trevor Ashby's farm appears to be a fairly typical farm near Allendale East, an area close to the picturesque city of Mount Gambier. But below the surface, this farm holds a remarkable secret. Many would be stunned to find out the otherworldly sight that's hidden beneath the farm, which was once described as being the closest you can get to venturing into outer space without actually leaving the Earth. The Shaft, a seemingly bottomless pit of water, got its name due to the phenomenon that happens when sunlight shines through the small entrance and strikes the lake, creating an underwater spotlight which illuminates the boulders more than 60 meters below the surface. It's so bright that it easily lights up the entire cavern. Viewed from beneath the surface, this spectacle is unequaled anywhere else in Australia. Due to its uniqueness, it became a very popular diving spot during the late 1960s and early 1970s. The sinkhole was discovered in 1938, as Trevor Ashby's grandfather was plowing the field when suddenly one of his horses seemed to lunge forward and fall. When he went to check what happened, he saw that it had stumbled over a small patch of ground that had given way to a hole that was about 1 foot or 0.3 meters in diameter, which proved to be an opening into a large underwater sinkhole. As he looked down, he could see the water reflecting from the sunlight coming from the hole. The family, not wanting a dangerous sinkhole on their property, along with friends and neighbors, tried to fill it by sending a flurry of heavy stones down the entrance. But after a few days, they realized it was so vast that they had no hope of actually filling it. The hole was later widened to around 3.5 feet or 1 meter in diameter. In the mid-1960s, a local diver climbed out the enlarged opening into the cave's 56-foot or 17-meter wide chamber and made the first descent to a depth of about 69 feet or 21 meters. The cave is one of several in this part of South Australia. The main chamber is about 140 meters long and 80 meters wide. Water level is about 7 meters below the ground, with the hole being considerably wider at this point. Due to the family trying to fill the hole, a rock pile directly under the opening rises to a depth of about 36 meters. A tunnel extends from the northwest to a maximum depth of 80 meters, and another to the east reaches an estimated depth of 124 meters. Because of the size of the hole and the height of the drop, divers and equipment are lowered separately into the chamber using a hoist system, with the divers having to put on their gear while already in the water or on a small dry ledge running around one side of the lake. The Shaft is the darkest and deepest recorded sinkhole in the region, and is even used by South Australian police water operations to help them practice search and rescue. To this day, the only way to access the huge underwater cave below the surface is through the tiny hole hidden among the grass. As news spread about the Shaft, adventurous divers traveled from afar to visit the cave. Before the disaster, 8,000 dives are estimated to have been made at what soon became known as one of the world's most spectacular diving caves. All it took was a single terrible incident to change the perception of the cave forever. Less than 8 months after 3 divers perished in Alleyn's Death Cave sinkhole, on May 26, 1973, a group of 9 divers arrived at the location near Allendale East in South Australia with the intention of having a recreational dive at the Shaft. The group consisted of John Bockerman, Peter Burr, brothers Glenn Millett, Stephen Millett, and sister Christine Millett, Larry Reynolds, Gordon Roberts, and Robert Smith, all of which were experienced open water divers. Even at their young age, Glenn and Stephen, like their sister Christine, were qualified open water diving instructors and worked in their dive shop back in Sydney. Robert was also a qualified open water instructor, while the rest of the group had extensive diving experience, but none of the divers had any experience diving caves. While the 8 divers intended to venture into the cave, a 9th member, Joan Harper, had decided she wouldn't be diving that day as she had trouble navigating the ladder down the entrance the day before. The day prior to the dive, the group had signed the guest book at the farmhouse and completed a successful dive at the sinkhole, extending a guideline approximately 150 feet or 46 meters into the water, and reaching the primary point of interest known as the rock pile. It briefly explored the perimeter of the rock pile before resurfacing. With the guideline already in place, the group planned to return the next morning to continue exploring the area. The group arrived at the sinkhole on the morning of May 28th after refilling their 72 cubic feet cylinders at Mount Gambier and quickly descended down the shaft. Reports from the surviving divers indicate that they had not planned to explore beyond the edge, a narrow and downward sloping continuation of the cave on one side of the main chamber, far from the natural light provided by the sinkhole's opening. The rock pile was generally considered the boundary for safe recreational diving. The surrounding cavern was dark, relatively unexplored, covered in loose silt and limestone rubble, and continued downwards to depths where the effects of nitrogen narcosis can become extreme, which is why a mix of oxygen, helium, and nitrogen, called trimix, is used when diving in the shaft. The only issue is that trimix wouldn't be developed until 1983. The group were diving on regular compressed air, which meant that even at the depths of the rock pile, the effects of nitrogen narcosis would have been significant, which may have already been impacting the judgment of the divers. On the surface, the 8 divers got into their wetsuits and around 1 p.m. they climbed down the ladder and entered the lake before swimming to the ledge where they put on the rest of their equipment. They had a brief talk about the intended dive as they donned their single cylinder of air, and they decided not to go deeper than a depth of 60 meters in a region leading to the low, deep tunnel to the northwest of the entrance. Now, having brought their guidelines with them as they feared getting tangled, this was the right call, although things didn't go according to plan. The following events are separate accounts by the 4 surviving divers and were pieced together with the help of former Chief Inspector Wallace Budd to establish a timeline of what happened to the 4 victims inside the cave. The group swam to the perimeter of the rock pile when Robert began to feel strangely ill. His depth gauge read approximately 55 meters. An experienced diver familiar with the symptoms of nitrogen narcosis, Robert signaled to the group that he would be returning to the top of the rock pile. The group acknowledged him but signaled that they were going to continue their descent. Robert began to ascend, but when he reached a depth of 10 meters, he started feeling better. So he decided to descend back down to 40 meters and began circling the rock pile for around 8 minutes until the others returned. Meanwhile, the other 7 divers reached the depth of 57 meters, where the floor almost met the wall. Here they reached the northwest entrance of the cave, where the bottom seemed to drop off. After hesitating for a few seconds, they approached the tunnel. Despite their earlier agreement not to enter the passage, they continued their descent, wanting just a quick look of the cave. As soon as they entered the tunnel, the chamber behind them appeared to be plunged into total darkness. There's some suggestion that this was caused by the arrival of dense clouds over the field above. The divers had been descending for a few minutes when Peter became concerned and swam over to Glenn so that he could see his depth gauge. This showed that they were already deeper than they had planned to go, being at 65 meters, and Glenn swam across to his sister to show her the gauge as well. Christine responded to his signal and did not seem badly affected by nitrogen narcosis, but she then continued to descend even further. Glenn, however, felt that he was close to blacking out, so he stayed at the mouth of the tunnel and waited for the others to turn around. Glenn watched with growing anxiety as the group descended further into the dark tunnel, where they had to totally rely on their small flashlights. At this point, Stephen and John disappeared from the party and were never seen alive again. Back in the chamber, Robert was still circling the rock pile when he saw the flashlight of Glenn returning from the direction the others had gone. Glenn had been monitoring his air and knew he was running out of time. As the rest of the group reached a depth of 68 meters, Gordon turned to Christine and Larry and showed them his decompression meter, indicating that it was time to ascend, as they went far deeper than they had intended to go and didn't want to do a lengthy decompression on their way up. But due to silt being stirred up, visibility became poor as they began their ascent out of the cave, and were stopped when they hit the ceiling of the cave at a depth of around 45 meters, still within the territory of nitrogen narcosis. They began sweeping their flashlights around as they searched for the way out. Gordon raised his arm to the ceiling and shrugged, as though indicating that there was no way out, although Larry stated that he could see that the group looked scared. Previously, when Glenn had begun to head for the surface, he pointed his flashlight behind him as he swam up. Peter, who was below the other 3 in the tunnel and running low on air, briefly saw Glenn's light and turned to follow him. Larry, though, was still stuck on the ceiling of the tunnel with Gordon and Christine, but suddenly his flashlight went out. As he struggled to turn it on again, he descended slightly and almost landed on top of Peter, who had started to swim towards Glenn. Larry was almost out of air too, so he followed Peter, and although he could still see Gordon and Christine, they had ascended into a dome on the roof of the tunnel, which had no exit. He shined his light at them, but could not attract their attention. While swimming back up, Larry looked back down the tunnel and saw another diver swimming very fast, but in the wrong direction further down into the cave. The diver would turn out to be John Bockerman, who was likely under the effects of severe nitrogen narcosis and may have been unaware that he was swimming to his death. The fourth casualty, Stephen Millet, got lost beneath the ceiling of the cave. Compared to the other victims, little is known about Stephen's final moments. At this point, Robert and Glenn resurfaced to find that Larry had already returned from his dive. Half a minute later, after completing a short decompression stop, Peter surfaced with almost no air left in his tank. Both Larry and Peter had to activate their air reserves to make it back to the surface. Glenn, knowing that half the group, including his brother and sister, were critically low on air, asked Joan to lower her unused cylinders. Waiting for Joan to lower the cylinders, Glenn used his last bit of air reserves and descended to a depth of 45 meters but saw nothing. He had no choice but to return to the surface as he was critically low on air and realized that the others would have also run out of air by that time. After the cylinders were finally lowered, Robert donned the fresh cylinders and headed down as soon as Glenn resurfaced. He initially descended to 55 meters to where he had last seen them, but found nothing in the calm water. He then descended to 68 meters where the cliff began to drop off. At the edge, he found Stephen's flashlight and camera. He also saw that a significant amount of silt had been disturbed and that the visibility had been reduced to nearly zero. Robert proceeded to resurface. By the time he resurfaced, an ambulance had arrived at the sinkhole. A last-ditch attempt to find the other divers was made by Peter, who went to the cave for one more look, but after running into the cloud of silt, he too was forced to resurface. By that point, they were aware that they were looking for bodies and not survivors. A search of the cave by the police underwater recovery squad to a depth of 200 feet or 61 meters was initiated on May 29, 1973, the day after the incident. The search was brief and no bodies were found. The team was aware that they were underprepared for such a dive, with the operation being described by Chief Inspector Wallace Budd as the Learn As You Go exercise. The second attempt was made the next day on May 30th, which again proved unsuccessful. The police search will ultimately be postponed as the team sought naval expertise on the dive, and similar to what happened in the famous Prologue cave incident, they recruited 2 of the survivors to be trained for the recovery, the training for which was expected to take several months. The following January, the landowners permitted a television crew making a documentary on diving safety in the lower southeast to enter the sinkhole. On January 22, 1974, after several days of diving in other caves in the area, the crew entered the shaft and descended to a depth of 50 feet or 15 meters. Using professional lighting equipment, he illuminated the cave like daylight. A technician looking into the direction of his 2 teammates noticed what appeared to be a third person behind them. Further inspection revealed that it was a motionless body in a wetsuit. The team turned the light away and immediately resurfaced to report the body. According to the crew, the body was not filmed. On the morning of January 23, 1974, police arrived at the sinkhole and dove to the location, where they found the body floating under a ledge against the sloped cave ceiling. The body was immediately taken out of the cave, and police divers continued searching to a depth of 55 meters, finding nothing else. The body was only identifiable by the equipment it was wearing, with the official identification requiring dental records. The body was found to be that of Stephen Millet. The landowners, growing increasingly uncomfortable with the remaining 3 bodies stuck on their property, approached an amateur diving team from Melbourne to begin recovery efforts. However, the police diving team was finalizing their training around the same time. On March 9, 1974, RG Trainer and a team of divers entered the shaft. At a depth of 185 feet or 56 meters, Trainer saw a body below him laying on its back. On further examination, he found the second body directly beneath it. These were the bodies of Christine Millet and Gordon Roberts. 20 feet or 6 meters deeper, Trainer also located the body of John Bockerman beneath the rock ledge. He attempted to move the body into a more easily recoverable position, but abandoned the efforts knowing he didn't have enough air for this task. The next day, the divers attempted to return and recover the bodies, but once again failed, and the effort was called off after a storm left the water too murky. Several more dives were attempted, but the bodies could not be relocated. Finally, on March 11th, the 3rd day of diving, the bodies were found. Christine Millet and Gordon Roberts were recovered from a depth of 195 feet or 61 meters. Attempts were made to recover John's body from a depth of 115 feet or 66 meters the following morning, but the divers aborted the recovery because of the onset of severe nitrogen narcosis. The divers were sent home for a month to recover from the extended efforts and to do further training for the final recovery, which was the most challenging because of its extreme depth and the position of the body. After making a number of special practice deep dives, the final dive plan included 1 day of diving to secure the location of the body using a guideline, a rest day for the divers to recover from potential narcosis effects, and a 3rd day to recover the body. The divers experienced significant narcosis during both days of diving, but their improved equipment and procedures ensured that the operation went as planned, and John's body was recovered from the cave on April 9, 1974, 11 months and 11 days after the accident. The cause of death in all 4 divers was found to be the obvious lack of air with terminal drowning. Following the accident, Robert Smith stated that on the initial dive he experienced severe nitrogen narcosis at 180 feet or 55 meters, but experienced no narcosis effects after grabbing a spare tank and returning to search for the others. He also claimed to be experienced at depths of 300 feet or 91 meters on regular compressed air without experiencing notable narcosis effects. He stated that the local dive shop had filled their scuba cylinders with bad air, and that it was the air and not just the depth of the dive that had caused the tragedy. The tank he took on the first dive had been filled at Mount Gambier, while the spare tank for the second dive to search for the missing divers had been filled back in Sydney. An expert in dive medicine, Dr. Kent, was consulted regarding the accident and specifically tasked with the examination of the cylinders recovered from Smith and the rest of the party. After extensive examination on the contents of the recovered cylinders, he concluded that the allegations of impure air were entirely without foundation. Dr. Kent had expressed an opinion that the group had neglected a number of safety measures in the planning and execution of the dive, and that these factors and bad air ultimately led to the accident inside the cave. In the autopsy of Stephen Millett, 4 possible modes of fatal injury were considered. The first was air embolism, a consequence of long overpressure injury usually due to a rapid ascent while holding your breath. The second was lung barrel trauma, although the evidence of this would no longer have been detectable after such a long period of time. The third was death as a consequence of breathing contaminated air, which was ruled out through the examination of the air remaining in the cylinders and the lack of evidence of carbon monoxide in tissue samples. The fourth was the obvious case of death by drowning, which was supported by the evidence of diatom residue in the lung tissue, indicating that there had been water entry before or possibly after death. Along with the contamination theory, air embolism was also found to be unlikely from the accounts of the survivors. The coroner, Special Magistrate R.F. Stokes, concluded that the 4 divers overstayed their bottom time, ran out of air, and died of hypoxia. A further finding was that although divers claimed to be experienced and 4 of them were open water diving instructors, none of them were experienced sinkhole, cavern, or cave divers, and that no appropriate safety precautions had been taken, referring specifically to the lack of guidelines, staged deco cylinders, and a recognizable safety system such as the buddy system, and that no one had the clear responsibility for planning the dive and safety of the group. After the coroner's scathing verdict on the group's lack of precautionary measures, Chief Inspector Wallace Budd wrote that our natural curiosity means their death in the shaft wouldn't be the last. He said the grim fact remains that 4 intrepid young people died in their prime while pursuing one goal, exploring the perimeter of the shaft's vast floor and the surrounding piles of stones. Unfortunately, her old story is of adventures gone wrong. As long as the human race holds out and goes hand in hand with the goddess curiosity, the story will have many sequels. As a result of the public outcry that followed, the drowning sparked the formation of the Cave Divers Association of Australia, which sought to self-regulate cave diving instead of having it banned. To this day, the ramifications of the incident can still be felt. Any potential divers to the shaft have to be fully certified by the CDAA in order to ask for permission to attempt to dive into the shaft, while much fewer people are attempting a plunge into the clear but ominous waters of the shaft. It's still considered one of the most dangerous underwater caves in the world. Thank you for watching. On April 6, 1969, a group of friends make their way to the city of Mount Gambier on the southern tip of South Australia to enjoy a relaxing day at Kilsby Sinkhole. 3 of them would enter the water and attempt to dive to 60 meters or 197 feet, but only one of them would return. This is their story. It was Sunday, April 6, 1969. A group of 10 friends would decide to go to the picturesque Kilsby Sinkhole in Mount Gambier to do some swimming and diving. The sinkhole is in South Australia, on private property owned by the Kilsby family since the 19th century. Situated in the middle of a barren field, the location of the sinkhole is unremarkable. Once you make your way from the city and drive halfway down Sister Road, you come across a small barn-like structure with the words Kilsby Sinkhole written on it. The sinkhole itself is gated, surrounded by a chain-linked fence, offering an inviting view to anyone who would look through the fence and into the sinkhole with its crystal clear water. At 11 a.m., the group of 10 friends arrived at Kilsby Sinkhole, got out of their cars, and started to unpack their gear. In the group were divers George, Patrick, Carrie, and Brett, who had been at the sinkhole the previous day on a dive, making it all the way down to 55 meters before having to resurface. Most of the group planned to either swim or snorkel in the water, while Brett, George, and Philip planned to once again go on a deep dive, with Carrie staying topside, taking care of the guideline. George had brought his camera to take pictures. He would stay topside for a bit to take pictures of Brett and Patrick as they began their descent, and then join them a short time later. Being the more experienced diver, George advised the pair not to go in too deep, but Brett and Patrick had different plans, wanting to scratch their names on the cave wall at around 60 meters deep. They had a false sense of confidence having completed a similar dive the previous day. This would prove costly. After George took photos of Brett and Patrick, the pair went into the crystal clear water and, using the strong sun behind them, started making their descent into the sinkhole. The group had brought a 50-meter guideline that they would extend from the surface that they would then tie off before trying to make it lower into the cave. Brett and Patrick tied off at 28 meters before diving the rest of the way with the main guideline in the sinkhole. On the surface, George had put his camera away and started to get ready to join Brett and Patrick on the dive. George had intended to follow the guideline down to where it was tied off, but as he was preparing to go into the water, he realized that the guideline had come undone and he no longer saw it. Concerned with this fact, George proceeded to dive without the guideline and dove to the 28-meter mark where he saw the guideline free-floating in the water. It's not known how much time passed between Brett and Patrick going in and George, but when he made it to that depth, there was no sign of Brett or Patrick. He quickly looked at his air gauge and decided to wait there for 5 minutes, hoping that the other divers would appear. But with each passing second, he grew more and more concerned and decided to resurface. Once back up, George looked around, eventually spotting Carrie. Almost out of breath, he asked Carrie if Brett and Patrick had resurfaced, hoping that maybe they had passed him on the way up and they simply missed each other. With almost a hesitation in his voice, Carrie replied that they had not. At this point, George's concerns only grew larger. He quickly looked at his air gauge again, deciding to go back down to look for the missing divers. George made it all the way back down to 28 meters, and at this point, he had to switch to his reserved air. Knowing he didn't have much time left, George frantically looked around, trying to find any indication of the 2 missing divers. But all he saw was the haunting stillness of the water. After a few minutes, George looked back at his air gauge and realized it was getting critically low. As he turned to ascend, from the corner of his eyes, he saw a faint light gently bobbing up and down in the water. And as he got closer and closer to it, he noticed that it was a flashlight, the same one the group was using. When he was almost right on the light, he realized that behind it were 2 lifeless bodies, gently perched on the wall of the sinkhole, with one being on its back. Upon realizing this, George froze, trying to process exactly what he was seeing, unable to come to grasp with the fact that these were the bodies of his friends. Coming out of his frozen state, George went right into a frantic one and swam upwards towards the surface as fast as he could. George went up so fast that he burst through the surface of the water, most likely alarming some of the waterside guests as they enjoy a beautiful day, oblivious to what had just occurred and the waters below. George, out of breath, told the group what he saw, and they quickly called the police. With Mount Gambier being a famous spot with multiple sinkholes in the area, the police arrived shortly, accompanied by recovery divers. The bodies of Brett and Patrick were recovered 3 hours later. The record of the recovery showed that when the divers got to the bodies, the lights were still on, showing a foreboding path to the location of the two lifeless bodies. The report also shows that Brett's equipment was still intact, but it was a different story for Patrick, having lost his mask, snorkel, and light, probably as he started to realize the dire situation he was in, and slowly running out of air, started thrashing around, trying to survive. For whatever reason, once out of the sinkhole, the two bodies were sent to the morgue, where they would stay for nearly a month awaiting examination. A local doctor performed the autopsy on the pair of divers. He stated, "In my opinion, death was the result of an air embolism due to decompression. Simply put, they died from decompression sickness, aka the bends, while still underwater. Perhaps from a rapid ascent, as they were fatally underprepared for such a deep dive, and it cost them their lives." Thank you for watching. On October 9, 1972, a group of friends on their way back home to the city of Alleyn decided to stop at a sinkhole located in the pine forest east of Mount Gambier in South Australia. The four of them entered the sinkhole for a recreational dive, but only one of them would return. This is their story. It was Monday, October 9, 1972. A group of four friends coming back from a weekend of diving along the South Australian coast would decide to make a quick stop to a new sinkhole they heard about on their way back home to the city of Alleyn. Located in the dense pine forest east of Mount Gambier, a city renowned for its volcanic and limestone features including lakes, forests, and sinkholes, Alleyn Sinkhole was not a very known dive site at the time, being rumored to be only 20 meters or 65 feet deep, perfect for a quick dip in the water, or so they thought. The group arrived at the sinkhole and inspected the inviting crystal clear water, after which they started to unpack their gear. The group consisted of 39-year-old Dave, 17-year-old Christopher, 18-year-old Sandra, and 17-year-old Ron. Dave easily had the most experience in the group, having been diving for over 15 years at this point. But the rest of the group, while young, also had multiple years of experience, although none had any experience in cave diving. After putting on their gear, the group entered the water with a full cylinder of air, but decided to leave their guidelines in the car since the sinkhole wasn't very deep and there wasn't any additional passages heading out of the main chamber. This would prove costly. The group swam for a few minutes near the surface, before deciding to dive deeper to explore the bottom of the sinkhole. On the way down, they spotted what looked to be a passageway between some boulders at around 6 meters or 20 feet deep. Dave, being the much more experienced diver, motioned to the others that he would go and check it out, and for the others to stay outside. Dave went through the 1 meter high, 3 meter wide passage and entered a chamber with crystal clear water. He soon realized that it would be dangerous for the others to come, as the chamber contained a lot of silt, which when kicked up can impair your visibility so much you wouldn't be able to see your own hands in front of your face. After the realization, he turned to start heading back out of the chamber, and to his shock he saw the other 3 divers had already entered. But even worse, being complete amateurs to cave diving and not knowing the proper techniques required, they had completely stilted out the way back. The group quickly realized what happened and immediately started to look for the way out, spending the next 30 minutes searching the walls of the cave for the entrance. But without a proper guideline, they were unable to locate the entrance to the chamber behind a thick cloud of silt. And to make matters worse, in their haste to try and get out, they ended up picking up even more silt from the chamber floor, compounding the issue and making visibility even worse. Because of this, they would eventually lose sight and contact with each other, leaving each person alone to find their way out. With their air supply running low, they frantically looked for a way out, but with the visibility in the chamber now mere inches, this was all but impossible. At this point, Ron started to swim up a bit to see if the entrance was higher than he had originally thought. During his ascent, he saw a shadow in the murky water, before coming up to it and realizing it was a motionless diver. With the body floating face down in the hauntingly still water, Ron quickly decided he had to leave the body behind and continue his search for the entrance. But then he noticed that it was getting harder and harder to breathe. He was getting critically low on air. With it getting even harder and harder to breathe, Ron made one final push to try and find his way out. And incredibly, as the silt started to settle, he was able to locate the passage due to a faint glimpse of daylight, with his cylinder having only minutes of air remaining. Once Ron got to the surface, he informed others on the surface of what happened and had them contact the local authorities. Ron then proceeded to go to the edge of the sinkhole and started banging on his cylinder, trying desperately to help his friends any way that he could. Unfortunately, due to the nature of caves with their winding passages, this was a pointless effort. None of the other divers resurfaced, and considering how low his own tank was, Ron knew that his friends had already ran out of air. Although local authorities arrived at the scene, due to the nature of the cave, an experienced diver was needed. The bodies of the other divers were recovered the next day by a friend of Dave's by the name of Mac Laurie. Mac was also a very experienced diver, but this recovery would be a dangerous one, and Mac ended up getting stuck multiple times while trying to recover the bodies. Dave was the first body recovered as he was close to the entrance, but Chris and Sandy were discovered together in a narrow tunnel on the other side of the chamber. Considering the resemblance of the narrow tunnel to the chamber's entrance, there is little doubt that they thought they had found a way out and were relieved before running into a solid wall and slowly coming to the realization that it was a dead end. And with their air running out, dread now swept over them, as there was nothing they could do. After this incident, sadly, the cave became restricted to recreational diving before being gated and eventually closed off by a concrete block. A factor as to why the sinkhole may have been closed was because the cave had gotten the nickname Death Cave due to a report in the local newspaper about the incident the following week. Calling the site Death Cave gave the impression that the cave was the killer, rather than any errors on the part of the divers. The legacy of this unfortunate title persists in the minds of many to this day. It was later stated that their deaths, while in accident, was caused by negligence, and they would have likely been able to find a way out if they had simply brought the guidelines with them on the dive. Thank you for watching.
And I'm looking for a cave that I found, and I didn't have a sidearm when I was here before. And something about that cave just spooked me. Out of all the caves I've ever gone in, this one just made my body vibrate. The closer I got to it, the crazier my body felt. And I was like, all right, I'm not gonna go in there right now, but I'm coming back someday.
On October 18th, 2014, experienced hiker Kenny Veach posted a video searching for a mysterious cave he named the M Cave. A month later, on November 10th, Kenny decided to go back in search of the cave and ventured out into the desolate Mojave Desert. After not hearing back from Kenny for 3 days, his girlfriend called the police. Even though an extensive search was conducted, no traces of Kenny were ever found. At 47, Kenny Veach was an experienced hiker, having grown up on the outskirts of Las Vegas. Kenny wasn't a stranger to the barren wastelands outside his borders. Although experienced, Kenny took risks and loved to hike off trail. traversing vast distances alone, without navigational aids like maps, GPS, or compasses, as he said they were for amateurs. Kenny had a love for extreme hiking, going on hikes in the sweltering heat of the Mojave Desert, with minimal food or water, going hours between sips. Kenny would also eat things he found in the desert. He especially liked pine nuts and would also handle rattlesnakes and admire other animals found in the desert. It seems like the only time he was truly happy was when he was on his hikes, ignoring the reality of the unforgiving landscape. To pursue his passion full-time, 14 months before his disappearance, Kenny had left his job of 17 years as a service technician for a coffee company. After leaving his job, Kenny had tried to pivot himself as an inventor and had made several videos trying to pitch his inventions to shows like Shark Tank and Quirky. Even though he had sent a handful of videos, he had spent a good portion of his remaining capital on these inventions, but it didn't work out. This led to the series of unfortunate events to come. At 48,000 square miles, the Mojave Desert, easily the driest and hottest place in North America, is desolate and unforgiving, with the terrain full of the skeletal remains of those who foolishly failed to take it seriously. It is home to a few U.S. Air Force bases, notably the Nellis Air Force Base just north of Vegas, and the infamous Area 51 further up north. A large part of the landscape is off limits to civilians, as it hosts the site of the Nellis Air Force Base Test and Training Range. In an Area 51 related video, a user by the name of Snakebit McGee stated how he found a mysterious cave in the Mojave Desert. He quickly garnered skeptics who egged him on, telling him to go back and record the cave as proof. On October 18, 2014, Kenny, under the name of Snakebit McGee, posted a 21-minute long video titled M Cave Hike. In the video, standing near a mining shaft, Kenny starts by describing a hike he was on when he came across a deep cave with a large entrance that looked like an uppercase M. When he approached the cave, he felt his body start to vibrate, with the vibrations getting stronger and stronger the closer he got. He decided not to enter the cave and wait until he brought his firearm with him on this hike. Before heading out on the hike, he pans the camera into the mine, zooming it into the worn-down abandoned shaft, noting how deep the mine is. This mine would later give investigators a clue, but also more questions than answers. The video ends with Kenny being unable to find the cave. He then posted the video on YouTube, and while some comments showed their fascination with Kenny's story, the skeptics grew bolder, saying that the fact he was unable to find the cave means he made the whole thing up. Kenny got defensive and vowed to go back in search of the cave. Before his last hike, he also posted a comment under the video and stated he planned to do a 3-day hike, crossing the same canyon in the previous video where he said he found the cave. He also dared any of his skeptics to join him on this hike. One comment, though, stated that Kenny shouldn't go back in search of the cave, because if he did find it and entered, he wouldn't come back out. That comment has since been deleted. On the morning of November 10th, Kenny left to go on his 3-day hike. At 6 in the morning, Kenny drove his truck to his usual spot and by all accounts departed in search of the cave. Being a prolific hiker, Kenny planned a long and brutal multi-day hike, which he stated before has become a normal part of his life. Before leaving outside of cell phone range, Kenny texted his girlfriend at the time, Sharon, informing her of his hike, saying he would be back in around 3 days and that he would text her when he got home. As soon as the 3rd day came, Sharon patiently waited for the text from Kenny, but that text never came. She decided to contact local authorities. Only a few hours after she got off the phone with the authorities, the search for Kenny Veach officially began. Police arrived at the desolate canyon at the base of the mountain range and were quickly able to find Kenny's truck. They then proceeded to comb the area for clues, but didn't find anything. They also noted that there was no signs of a struggle, which would have suggested foul play. After coming up empty, the police contacted Red Rock Search and Rescue, who specializes in finding and rescuing people in the desert, who, thanks to information by police, started their focus by trying to find the M-shaped cave. They ended up going to the mine that Kenny had featured in his video. Around the entrance of the mine, they found his phone and some change. Thinking that Kenny's body could be in the mine, the group was tempted to go down and check, but considering the poor condition of the mine, they instead contracted a specialized group who went down. They came back up empty-handed. They continued their search of the surrounding areas of the canyon, but because there are over 250,000 abandoned mines in Nevada, some of which litter the desert, the search proved fruitless. Besides the phone and change, no other traces of Kenny were found. Back in Kenny's home, police scoured the residence for any clues about Kenny. Kenny's house was littered with the things from the desert. Kenny would bring stuff that most would consider junk back home with him to decorate the house. Police ended up finding Kenny's video camera in his house, meaning he went back to record the cave without it. He did apparently bring his point and shoot camera, as it was missing from his home, along with his tent, sleeping bag, and firearm. Investigators began searching his computer, and upon searching his browser history, investigators found some disturbing things that would change the course of the investigation. Sharon had told investigators that months before his disappearance, Kenny had been dealing with debilitating depression, which had gotten worse because of the lack of income and the possibility of losing his house. She posted a comment saying, as his money decreased, he became more and more depressed. He really did not look for another job. Around the time he posted the original video trying to find the M cave, Kenny and Sharon had a long conversation together, where she could see that Kenny had spiraled into a deep depression. At that point, Kenny confided and opened to Sharon on his thoughts about harming himself, which he stated he had for most of his life. He also told her, if I decide to do it, you will be okay, because you are good at the law of allowing. Sharon also revealed that Kenny told her if he actually did do it, it wouldn't be in his home and that no one would ever find him. Sharon also suspected that Kenny had these tendencies because his father had done the same thing, leaving a 20-year-old Kenny to stumble on the body. This was confirmed in his search history. Police noted that Kenny had searched for terms related to his depression and had also written the phrase "help me" over 50 times, maybe as a cry for help. But it doesn't appear that he got the help he was so desperately looking for. The night before Kenny went on the hike, Sharon said that they were together and he didn't bring up the cave with her, but they did talk about his depression and the choices he needed to make in his life. Although Sharon told investigators that even in his delicate state of mind, she believed Kenny about the cave, saying, I think it was something he found on one of his recent hikes before he disappeared. Sharon believed Kenny had been nothing but truthful with her during their relationship, so she had no reasons to doubt his story. She said, we went to a movie together the night before his last hike, and he did not bring up the cave then either. The movie they saw was Birdman. At the time, due to the almost mythical description of the cave, more than a few conspiracies started to pop up on YouTube about what really happened to Kenny Veach. One story is that Kenny found the cave, entered, and never came back out. On June 6, 2021, a YouTube channel named Exploring Abandoned Mines and Unusual Places posted a video titled, I Found the M Cave of Kenny Veach. He starts the video by mentioning that he just turned on the Nevada State Highway 375 East, also known as the Extraterrestrial Highway, and then proceeds to make his way down the highway, noting the Nellis Air Force Base and Area 51. The video then transitions to a shot of what seems to be the M cave Kenny had found. He proceeds to enter the cave, but it seems to be shallower and wider than the cave Kenny had described. He also noted that there seems to be stacked rocks near the entrance of the cave, as if the cave was in the process of being sealed off. He also mentioned that he came to know about the location of the cave due to a random message he received from a person in the military, simply named Don, who also took an interest in the story and was searching for the cave, but couldn't continue his search due to an accident. No other details were provided. Inside the cave, he found some pieces of wood, along with a dirt-covered and faded sign that read like something out of a sci-fi movie. In a follow-up 2-minute video almost a year later, a new sign can be seen to have been planted at the entrance to the cave, with a warning that read, Danger, Restricted Area. Another conspiracy is that Kenny is still alive and faked his own death due to the growing financial issues he was facing. This theory is supported by one of Kenny's sisters-in-law, Susan Veach. There is video footage of someone that she says looks to be Kenny, breaking into the business of his other sister-in-law and still alive. The video shows someone looking for something very specific, and the entire break-in lasted only 42 seconds, with the perp only taking an iPad that was near the window he entered. Kenny's sister-in-law is convinced it's Kenny, while his daughter and brother do not. Due to it being a high-traffic business, fingerprints weren't taken, and police said that the claim that it was Kenny in the video couldn't be confirmed. In the end, due to the overwhelming evidence in the house, police concluded that Kenny died somewhere in the desert, that he parked his car on the morning of November 10th and started his hike with the intention of never coming back. To this day, no other piece of evidence of Kenny in the Mojave Desert has ever been found. Thank you for watching.
People that have died at the Blue Hole generally dive masters and instructors. People who go around saying, I'm going to be okay.
On April 28, 2000, open water instructor Yuri Lipski would dive the infamous Blue Hole found close to the Egyptian city of Dahab. Against the advice of other divers, Yuri would proceed to dive into the Blue Hole with only a single cylinder of air and a camera. Unknown to Yuri is that he would be recording his final moments on this dive. The Blue Hole is a sinkhole that's 120 meters or 394 feet deep, 5 miles north of the Egyptian city of Dahab. It doesn't have the nicest coral formations, shipwrecks, or the most fish, but the underwater cathedral at the edge of the Red Sea is a magnet for divers, primarily because of its reputation. Hundreds if not thousands of divers descend each year into the crystal blue waters of the Red Sea, both professional and recreational divers with years of experience tucked under their weighted belts. Head to the Blue Hole located on the southwest coast of the Red Sea, searching for the dive of a lifetime. The Blue Hole is easy to reach. It doesn't take a boat or even a swim to get there. From the coast of Dahab, it's about 10 meters from the shore to the entrance. The water is warm with great visibility and there's virtually no current. The lure to dive here is an arch that lies 100 meters below the water. At a depth of 55 meters or 180 feet, an arch opens into a 26-meter long tunnel that leads through the reef and into the open sea. The floor of the tunnel slopes from a depth of 102 meters down to 120 meters. On the other side, the seafloor drops in increments from 130 meters to over 1,000 meters or 3,300 feet. Its nickname is the Diver Cemetery, yet thousands continue to flock here each year, oblivious to the increasing number of plaques that hang on the nearby cliff face to mark those who never returned. There are 14 plaques dedicated to divers who lost their lives in the Blue Hole, which is an opening of 80 meters or 262 feet in diameter, located at the roof of the barrier reef with its walls tapering down like the side of a funnel. With no public records or database, it's hard to say how many people have lost their lives at this location. Divers in Dahab suggest that anywhere from 130 to as many as 200 divers have died diving the location. Many of those who died were attempting to swim under the arch. This challenges to divers what Everest is to mountain climbing, but it can also be disorienting. Accessibility of the site in the clear warm waters of the Red Sea makes the dive look easier than it really is. At over 55 meters and within an overhead environment, the dive requires experience and training usually associated with an advanced technical certification. The critical limit for diving with compressed air is 56 meters or 184 feet. The exit from the tunnel is 1 meter lower at its upper edge. The entry to the arch is not easy to find because of the indirect line between the Blue Hole and open water. Divers who miss the entry can accidentally continue to descend, since the floor continues down to well over 100 meters due to a lack of any reference point. Time taken to pass through the arch may also be underestimated. Because of the clarity of the water, the tunnel can appear shorter than it actually is. Divers report that the tunnel appears to be less than 10 meters or 33 feet long, but has officially been measured as 26 meters or 85 feet long. Also, there is a slight current flowing inwards through the arch and into the Blue Hole, creating a spring-like effect and increasing the time it takes to swim through the tunnel. As you make your way down into the water, it starts to feel like you're an astronaut floating in space. The light from the surface and the colors gradually disappear. In the end, there is nothing but blue, hence the name. The best time to dive is in the morning, when the sun shines directly through the tunnel and into the Blue Hole. It's a magical sight, one that attracts both experienced and inexperienced divers. The hub was once a small fishing village. Today, waiters stand in front of restaurants on the boardwalk, trying to lure people inside. No one knows exactly how many there are. The same can be said about the amount of diving schools. Because of the tough competition, prices are low. Diving is a discount business in the hub. To avoid accidents in the Red Sea, the Egyptian Diving Association stipulates that divers cannot dive below 40 meters, or 131 feet on compressed air. In the hub, however, divers can buy depth. For only $100, you can find a guide who is willing to take a diver into the arch without asking unnecessary questions. You can also dive into the blue hole alone. This will lead to the series of unfortunate events to come.
This is Martin and Connor. Young, yes. 23, 24, maybe younger. This is Yuri, the Russian guy. Head of Yuri, of course. What we could do. What's meant to be, it will be. Cannot change it.
There is likely no one who knows more about the blue hole than Tarek Omar. He was one of the first to explore it, touch the bottom and see the bodies on the floor of the Red Sea. He still holds the depth record in the area, diving to an impressive depth of 209 meters or 685 feet.
I started exploring the blue hole, let's say 4 years ago. Started my first deep dive on it. Last year I reached the max operation depths in the hole, which was around 190 meter trimixin.
Tarek opened the first center for technical diving in the hub. Technical divers use special gas mixtures made of oxygen, helium, and nitrogen. It's strongly recommended, but not enforced, to dive through the tunnel in the blue hole on mixed air like trimix, but not on compressed air. While there is no official list, Tarek himself estimated that in the last 30 years, more than 200 divers have lost their lives in the blue hole. He compares what is happening in the blue hole to the madness on Everest. He also doesn't know exactly how many bodies he has recovered, but he can still remember the names of the first 2 divers he pulled from the depths of the Red Sea, bringing them back onto the Egyptian shore. They were Conor O'Regan and Martin Gara. They were considered cautious divers. Both died here on November 19th, 1997. They were only 22 and 23 years old. Since that time, he has pulled more than 20 bodies out of the water, earning himself the nickname of the Bone Collector. After an accident, he doesn't wait too long to recover a body, usually 2 or 3 days, but never more than 7. The reason for that, he says, is that the body gets bloated and looks terrible when it remains in the water. When that happens, he says, it's better to leave the body where it lies. The reason why he brings the bodies up is because he wants to help the grieving parents. He doesn't ask for anything and just charges the cost of gas used to retrieve the body. When asked how he finds the bodies in the blue hole, he said, if I were to hide something in your garden, you would also find it pretty quickly. Most of the bodies lie at a depth of 120 meters. When Tarek finds a body, he grabs it in his arms and ties it to his own body. He has 5 minutes before he ascends. At 40 meters, once he can see the surface, he sends the body up with an airbag. Because it takes Tarek so long to decompress, he remains underwater for up to 3 hours. By the time he returns to land, the body has already been removed. There are still bones on the floor of the blue hole, where the family members want them to stay as a memorial, but also a grim reminder to any diver who ventures down into the clear blue waters of the Red Sea.
The second year, I saw him maybe 30 minutes or 40 minutes before his accident, because he's wandering around asking for a body or someone qualified experienced deep water, because he was saying that he's experienced deep diver, and we hear it every day. I'm here for 2 days. I want to do the canyon and the blue hole. Regardless, experience, certification, regardless, nothing.
Yuri Lipski arrived in the hub after visiting his father in Tel Aviv from Russia. Tarek met the 22-year-old Russian diver 1 hour before his dive. He wanted to film the arch, Tarek said. I said, okay, so you'll need 2 weeks of training with me first, and then we'll film. With only a weekend in town, Yuri turned down Tarek's offer and set off to find a less demanding guide. The reason why Tarek takes such a long time prepping for the dive is because of the planning that's necessary to dive in the blue hole. Due to the depth and the time taken to find and navigate the tunnel, inevitably it turns into a decompression dive, requiring decompression stops on ascent in order to avoid decompression sickness, also known as the bends. Also, the rate of gas consumption increases with depth, which can lead to divers running out of gas or not having enough gas to make the decompression stops. There's also the temptation to dive on a single cylinder of air, which has been done multiple times before, but that is dangerously close to the minimum gas requirements for the dive. Diving the arch without proper gas planning has resulted in countless deaths. Yuri was aware of the conditions awaiting him, or the dive information already programmed into his diving computer. With this crucial piece of equipment, he would know what depth he was descending to, the amount of air remaining in his tank, and even the amount of time the overall dive should take. Further pre-dive planning had warned him that the arch could appear shorter than it actually was. Compounding these issues was the odd descending angle of the tunnel itself. This feature had taken many unsuspecting divers by surprise, causing them to underestimate the depth they were descending to, with a finite amount of air in their cylinders. A miscalculation could leave Yuri with barely enough air to make it back to the surface. Yuri had factored all of this into his dive. This was the standard operating procedure for such a challenging dive. What wasn't standard was that he was doing the dive alone and on regular air. Still, he wasn't concerned, as he thought he was well prepared. All of his equipment was in perfect working order, and being an instructor, he had a false confidence in his diving skills. With the weight secured in place and his camera ready to record the dive, Yuri took a giant stride into the tapering blue hole and began his descent. His camera recorded the entirety of the dive. It showed an ordinary dive that quickly turned into an uncontrolled descent, from the arch all the way down to a depth of 115 meters. Yuri landed with an inaudible thud, shaking the camera. The camera continues to record as he rips his regulator out of his mouth, as the last gasp of air is ripped from his lungs. The camera continues to record as he tries to inflate his BCD, his disoriented mind vaguely comprehending that safety lies on the surface, 115 meters above. The camera angles change, continue to record as his body convulses one last time and ceases to move, alone at the bottom of the sea. The video lasts 7 minutes and 16 seconds.
Yuri actually have sort of emotional relation with me. First, because I saw him the 20 minutes or 30 minutes before this accident. And second, because it's my first time actually to be in contact with the family for full 6 days. A couple of months later, actually, his mom, she came back and we done like stones for the guy, write his name, birthday, and she threw some of his grave dust, threw it back in the blue wall. It was very sad again.
But often the flaws of the training systems are amplified by the idiosyncrasies of the Russian character. Many consciously take risks, believing that their experience will be sufficient to keep them safe.
When news of Yuri's death started circulating, many of the divers in the hub weren't surprised. The Russians, both instructors and regular divers, had a bad reputation in the hub. According to Tarek, they are considered careless, playing Russian roulette with their lives. 11 years after Yuri filmed his ill-fated descent, on November 7, 2011, Moscow native Igor Shallow dove to a depth of 115 meters. According to his dive logs, he had made 400 dives. He didn't survive the next one. He entered the blue hole and attempted to dive to the arch. He encountered a Swedish diver on his way down, at 90 meters along the outer wall of the blue hole. The Swedish diver said that Igor's movements were shaky, but that he had signaled he was okay. Igor had little experience with decompression dives. He went to 40, 66, 85, and then 106 meters. He didn't drop vertically to the depth he was aiming for, instead hitting ground at 120 meters, his first mistake. He then went down to 150 meters, staying just above the sea floor, his second mistake, because it cost him time and air. During his ascent, he started running out of air at 130 meters. An ascent should never be faster than 10 meters per minute. A diver expels nitrogen as the pressure decreases. If they ascend too quickly, bubbles can form in the blood and can lead to what's called decompression sickness, or the bends. Running out of air, Igor panicked and ascended without stopping, shooting to the surface like a balloon. Divers who ascend too quickly have to go to a decompression chamber and be given supplemental oxygen. Igor passed away from the complications of the ascent. At the request of Yuri's mother, Yuri's body and equipment was recovered the following day by Tarek. Saddened by the young diver's death, Tarek undertook the task solemnly. On completion of his recovery dive, he presented Yuri's belongings to his heartbroken mother 2 days later. The camera should have been damaged or even broken altogether, because it had been found at a depth of 115 meters, but it was only designed for 75 meters. Believing that it was broken as it wasn't rated to go down to such extreme depths, Tarek was shocked when he plugged the camera into a TV, and it worked perfectly, revealing Yuri's final moments to his distressed mother. Tarek was quoted as saying, "I regret that his mother will have this forever. If I knew the footage existed, I'd have flooded it. I think the thing that really upsets and saddens me about it was that his mom has it now. She has the footage of her own son drowning."
We're on the camera, plugged it on the wrist, and we're on the camera, and was sad because we have kids of Yuri and his family back on the Dead Sea. His father and his other mother and his sister and playing, and too many people dying.
Sport.
After his death, Yuri received a lot of backlash due to how underprepared he was for the dive. Witnesses who saw him before the dive saw him preparing to dive alone and carrying only 1 cylinder of air. When Omar was asked what went wrong, he said, first, that Yuri was too heavy. He was carrying 12 kilos of lead on his belt, plus the weight of his cylinder and a big heavy camera and batteries. Second, his BCD vest burst open. It was already full when he was desperately trying to pump air into it. And third, he says, was oxygen toxicity, which he thinks was the reason why Yuri was twitching when he reached the seafloor. Many speculate that the main reason the 22-year-old died was due to oxygen toxicity and nitrogen narcosis, both of which are common causes of death for divers who dive too fast and too deep. Oxygen toxicity occurs when a person breathes in too much supplemental oxygen at depth. This excess in oxygen wrecks lung tissue and fills the lung with fluid, making it harder for the lungs to send oxygen to the bloodstream. Another reason for Yuri's death could be nitrogen narcosis. Nitrogen narcosis can affect you mentally. It causes a drunken-like state that affects behavior. The rule of thumb among divers is that every 10 meters corresponds to a martini. At this depth, it probably felt like he downed more than 10 martinis. And much like alcohol, it affects everyone differently. Drunken underwater, a position you never want to be in when you're at the bottom of the sea. Another factor was his weight. Being overweight on a dive is an issue with new or inexperienced divers and causes them to constantly have to fill and dump air in their BCD, and it can cause divers to experience what is called yo-yoing. Yet according to Tarek, divers using compressed air aren't the only ones who lose their lives in the blue hole. Technical divers also make fatal mistakes. He says that technical diving requires discipline, but that there are always tourists in the hub who party until 3 a.m. in the morning and then go diving to 100 meters in the blue hole at 9 a.m. The reckless ones who are determined to get that number into their diving computers, the magical 100. But what may have truly killed Yuri may have been his over-eagerness. A local diving instructor said that Yuri tried to get guides to take him to the arch the year before, but was refused due to being inexperienced. Both his father and local divers seemed to recognize that he was a little too excited about the dive, and his own father seemed to know, based on the comments he made, that Yuri was a little too overconfident. Others believe that Yuri may have been trying to do a bounce dive, although this has been disputed. Given what we know about the circumstances of Yuri Lipski's death and the days leading up to it, the simple answer is that overconfidence killed him. Excited by the idea of reaching and recording the bottom of the blue hole, Yuri descended too far, too fast, and alone with only 1 cylinder of air. But what caused Yuri to descend as fast as he did may never be known. Yuri's death is a reminder for adventurers to not overestimate their abilities when going up against the forces of nature. To this day, the blue hole in the hub remains the world's deadliest dive site. Thank you for watching. On June 12, 2011, two divers were re-entering a flooded Soviet nuclear base near the small Latvian village of Vainode. After diving the site and entering one of the missile silos, they decided to resurface and return later that day with a third diver. The three divers would enter the water and proceed to dive to a maximum depth of 34 meters, but only two of them would return. Born at the height of the Cold War between the US and Soviet Union, the Vainode nuclear base was erected in the middle of a dense Latvian forest, far away from any civilian road or city. Since there were no large towns or villages nearby, it was the perfect place to construct a secret underground military base containing multiple nuclear missiles. In the late 1950s, at the height of the Cold War, the United States began to build nuclear-capable underground military bases, and the Soviet Union, feeling the need to also maintain its military's nuclear quick-strike capabilities, proceeded to do the same in the strategically located Baltic states. In early September 1960, the Soviet Union started the rapid construction of one of its first underground military bases in the village of Vainode, in what was at the time the Latvian SSR. Sitting at 160 meters or 520 feet above sea level, this location was chosen for its height, as it would allow the nuclear missiles to reach Turkey and all of the surrounding EU-NATO members. Because of this, it became an extremely important military site. The former military base contained a network of intercontinental nuclear missiles, and a bunker with a command post, always at the ready to launch the devastating firepower of the R-12 nuclear warheads hidden beneath the surface. It became a strategic army compound for the Soviet Union and an important military airport in the Baltic region, which was only abandoned in 1993. But due to the heavy cost of the Soviet-Afghan war that ultimately led to the demise of the Soviet Union, after 12 years of operation, the site was eventually shut down and abandoned. On June 18, 1978, the nuclear-capable missiles were removed from the site and shipped back to Russia. During this time, the base was not maintained, with snow and heavy rainfall leading to the eventual flooding of the former military base, which was now part of the government-run Latvian state forestry enterprise. Despite the fact that this is a potentially dangerous site, access to the site was not limited to the public, and there was no fencing or warning signs in place. This oversight would lead to a terrible tragedy.
Porą dienų reikia pabūti, jeigu plaukai paskutiniai nenuslenka, galima drąsiai.
I want to start this section off by saying that, while I try to maintain a very detailed account of the stories that I cover, for this particular story there was little information to go on, and even though I had some communication with people close to the accident, there is still a lot of details that is unknown, and because of this, there is no traditional timeline of events. On June 12, 2011, two Lithuanian divers set out to explore the recently discovered Soviet military base that had been flooded. Although the first dive was successful, the second dive ended in disaster. On the morning of June 12, 2011, Aidas Janetinovich's and Vytis Vilkas would enter the abandoned Soviet military base located near the small Latvian village of Vainode for a short dive. This was supposed to be a routine dive, as they had been diving at the site just a week prior, on the 4th of June, in which they recorded video inside of the now defunct military base. In the video, you can hear and see the apprehension of some of the members of the group about the potential dive inside of the abandoned base. Although judging by the other videos on their YouTube channel, this wasn't their first dive in such a structure. The group knew of not only the traditional dangers that awaited them, but also the potential radiation and other chemicals that may have been left behind when the base was deserted. At the end of the video on June 4th, you can hear them joking about the fact that if they didn't lose any hair after the dive, it would be okay to return, which they eventually did. The group enjoyed the initial dive and the challenges that the military base's labyrinth of rooms and tight corridors posed on the divers. They wanted to explore more of the empty but flooded missile silos located deep inside the structure. The gear they brought to the dive were light and simple. The pair wore safety helmets and brought smaller side-mounted cylinders, as they knew that portions of the base was only partially flooded, and they would have to take off some of their gear to get through some of the tight restrictions and crawl spaces before making their way to the silos. The first silo was one of the shallowest, and they reached a depth of 24 meters or 79 feet, looking at old Soviet technology and remnants left behind. The pair explored for a bit more before deciding to resurface. While back on top, they decided that they wanted to share this experience, and so they made a call to their friend, Linas Jakštas, and asked him to come join them on the dive. It's unclear whether the divers refilled their cylinders, grabbed new ones, or reused their old cylinders, but from what I gathered, they were diving on regular compressed air, and from what I could find, the divers didn't plan or do any decompression stops. Soon after Linus arrived, the three friends put on their gear and re-entered the base. They dove and marveled at the Cold War technology under the water, making their way back to the silos, but this time venturing deeper into the other silos, to a maximum depth of 34 meters or 111 feet. After spending time in the silos and enjoying the striking environment, they decided it was time to head back up as they were starting to run low on air. But on the ascent back up to the surface, Idas and the group were run into trouble after kicking up the large amount of silts that now lined the floor of the base. While the military base is a man-made structure, it still offers some of the dangers of traditional cave diving. Lining the floor of the base was a large amount of silt due to the soil and sediment that came from the forest that surrounded the base, seeping in with the snow and rainwater. This caused very fine particles of silt to engulf the floor. Once kicked up, visibility could quickly be reduced to zero, and due to the base having zero flow, a potential silt out could last days, if not weeks. While all three divers were experienced and usually followed normal cave diving safety protocols, including the unwritten rule of buddy diving, they unfortunately forgot or ignored a few of the 5 basic rules of cave diving during this dive. Considering the tight corridors and maze-like layout of the site, against their better judgment, the group decided to dive inside of the silt-covered base without a guideline. And after reviewing the video of the original dive on June 4th, there is a big chance that the group may have also been diving with only 1 flashlight each, and not the required 3 flashlights for a typical dive. As this was supposed to be a short dive, the divers also didn't plan out their dives, and due to the silt being kicked up and the irregular shape of the rooms, the divers got separated from one another and got lost trying to find the way back out. And what was now considered a full silt out in one of the larger rooms, the divers had to find their way out of the base not knowing which way led to the exit. They began to feel around in the heavy silt for any doorway or exit, trying desperately to find the way out, but under these conditions and without a guideline, it was an extremely difficult task. After some searching, Veach and Linus were able to find the correct exit and resurfaced in time. But Idas, who was lost and potentially disoriented due to the extremely poor visibility created by the silt, had a hard time finding the exit. And in the end, when he didn't find the exit in time, he ran out of air and drowned.
Look at where Dallas did.
Besides the lack of a guideline and overall planning of the dive, the other potential factors of the accident could have been what's known as repetitive diving. Repetitive diving is any dive you make before you completely off-gassed from any previous dive. Basically, it's when your body isn't giving enough time to release the nitrogen bubbles trapped inside your body from the first dive out of a series of dives. This means that divers who plan to do multiple dives in a single day need to calculate their dives differently, as they must account for the nitrogen bubbles already in their bodies. They would usually do this using a repetitive diving chart and calculating their RNT, or residual nitrogen time. While easily overlooked, repetitive diving can cause the early onset of some of the issues associated with diving, especially on regular compressed air, to happen much quicker than expected on the second and consequent dives. Although I don't know if they went past their no deco time or if they even had one on any of the dives. It's hard to say if they even calculated or knew it, as they didn't really plan anything for these dives. Ida's body was recovered from the base, with his official cause of death listed as drowning. Although some of the former Soviet nuclear bases were turned into museums, the Vainode nuclear base is still desolate, and from what I could see through recent pictures, it's still easily accessible to the public and still lacks any fencing or warning signs about the site. A lot of the other nuclear bases in the Baltics were eventually closed before becoming museums, and now feature museums with guided tours where tourists can go to the underground labyrinth of silos completely free of water. In these museums, they can learn about the importance of the bases, how life was at the base during the height of the Cold War, and the consequence of a nuclear strike. This was not the case for Vainode, and none of the museums make any mentions of Idas or the tragedy that occurred in the Vainode nuclear base, of the life that was lost during what he and his group of friends thought was just another interesting dive to reminisce about. And while some may criticize the decision to go diving without a guideline, or even to go diving at the abandoned nuclear base at all, the facts remain that people's natural curiosity mean that many will still explore these type of structures. And while Idas may now be gone, he is still very fondly remembered and missed by his friends and family. Thank you for watching.
Hi, I'm Wesley Skiles. Welcome to Jenny Spring.
You come to Jenny Springs to cave dive, the first thing you'll hear is, welcome to Jenny Springs, I'm Wes Skiles.
On July 21st, 2010, renowned cave diver and photographer Wesley Skiles was diving near Boynton Beach, Florida, filming a documentary when disaster struck. What happened was sent shockwaves through the diving community. This video will cover the life, death, and controversy surrounding the accident.
As human beings, a certain number of us are explorers, and I was gifted with that. I have a deep, deep curiosity for the unknown.
Wesley Skiles was born on March 6, 1958, in Jacksonville, Florida. Growing up near the beach, Wes took up surfing and diving at a young age. Wes started diving when he was just 8 years old, and recalled that he took to water like a fish. You could say that his passion for cave diving photography was set in motion in 1971, when the then 13-year-old surfer and newly certified YMCA open water diver conducted his first cave dive penetration, and simultaneously took his first underwater photograph at Jenny Springs in High Spring, Florida. He used a Nikon camera that an underwater photographer handed him to try, while his older brother, Jim, used a prototype underwater scooter built by his science teacher. He was quoted as saying, "Everyone told me don't go in the cave," Wes recalled. "But I went in the cave. I got the shot of my brother scootering past the entrance and the shot came out really good. I was hooked from that point on." What cemented his curiosity for cave diving in Wes's life was during the 1973-74 school year. The fossil club he was in took a field trip back to Jenny Springs. The group had spent the day looking for fossils, and right before it was time to get back on the bus, Wes watched several divers emerge from the caves of the spring, waited until they came out of the water, and excitedly questioned them about their fascinating hobby. Friends confirmed that on the ride back to Jacksonville, he kept saying, "This is what I want to do." And less than a decade later, Wes became a cave diving instructor and took a job managing the Branford Dive Center. It was there that he met Lamar Hires in 1979 and gifted him a copy of friend and mentor Chuck Exley's Blueprint for Survival. Afterwards, Hires barely survived running out of air while attempting a cave dive with a single cylinder. After the incident, Wes took him under his wing and taught him cave diving. Wes and soon after Lamar were engaged in building their own cave diving equipment such as dive lights, since there were no cave diving manufacturers at the time. Later, they both worked with Woody Jasper, Tom Morris, and others to develop side-mount diving equipment. Hires continued to invent and build gear, and went on to launch Dive Right in 1984. In 1983, Skiles left Branford to become manager at Jenny Springs, and the following year also became the training director for the cave diving section, a position he held for 5 years. Not surprising, with legendary cave diver Chuck Exley as his mentor, Wes became a skilled diver and passionate about cave exploration, and produced a series of maps of Little River, Rock Bluff, Cow Springs, and more. Over the years, Wes picked up a love for underwater photography. Pioneering cave diver George Benjamin was an early influence on his photography. In 1985, Wes founded Cars Productions, a photography and cinematography company named for the limestones found in freshwater caves and aquifers. Mark Long, who is a friend of Wes and a fellow water conservationist, said Wes was the first photographer to get really good pictures in underwater caves. Wes's lighting techniques in particular brought vibrancy to his photographs. Lighting underwater cave systems became a specialty for Wes, and he was probably the best in the world at it. He actually designed some of the very early lights used in cave videos. This wasn't Wes's early underwater career. As Wes grew as a photographer and within the conservation community, he eventually filmed, produced, and directed dozens of programs for television, including segments for PBS, IMAX, and the Discovery Channel. Skiles was a proponent of cave divers using their skill to assist with scientific diving projects and conservation. Skiles went on to contribute images for Nat Geo's December 2001 story, Islands of Ice, with help from Nat Geo's legendary deep-sea photographer Emery Christophe. He also worked with legendary divers Jolyn Paul Heinert and Bill Curtis, and was famously the first person to stand on the B-15 iceberg, which was the largest known iceberg at the time. Skiles, Curtis, Heinert, and Christophe would eventually produce the Ice Island documentary. Throughout his life, Wes will become a self-taught expert on Florida's freshwater springs and an outspoken advocate for their conservation. Wes has seen the deterioration of Florida's underwater world, and made it his mission to show the world what was happening through his powerful images. This led Wes to co-founding Karst Environmental Services, which is a consulting firm that performs water studies and tests for private companies in the state of Florida. Over his long career, Wes will become nominated for and win a lot of awards for his work. Among them would be Diver of the Year for Education in 1996, a regional Emmy Award in 2004, as well as the annual HD Fest Deafy Award for Best HD Documentary and Cinematography in 2009. But sadly, on July 21, 2010, Wesley Skiles' life would come to a sudden end.
Strikes the dive community. A well-known underwater photographer died yesterday off our coast. News Channel 5's Jay Cashmere has more on the life and the death of Wes Skiles.
Jim, a tough loss for the dive community. Skiles, a well-known cave diver, explorer, cinematographer, and director, died Wednesday afternoon while diving off Boynton Beach.
Wes not only had a seminal impact on the development of cave diving, but was also instrumental in helping scientists and policymakers see and understand the importance of underwater springs in the workings of Florida's aquifers, as well as to shed light on the public's awareness of the underwater world. This passion for conservation led him to take part in filming and documenting the underwater world he loved. Prior to the accident, Wes had just spent 2 weeks on a shoot for television's premier science program, Nova, filming for a segment called Speed Kills. Naturally, this one focused on the ocean. Wes was hired to film schools of large ugly fish called Goliath grouper. They would spend a few weeks taking pictures and videos of the schools of fish, but each time he went up to check the footage, he was unhappy with the way it came out. He wasn't a perfectionist, but he had tremendous pride in his work, and it showed. He went to the production team, trying to see if he can go back down to try and get better footage. But Nova, being on a tight schedule, decided it was better to move on. Still unhappy with the footage, Wes decided he would try to get better shots of the fish on his own. 10 days after leaving the Nova shoot, Wes went back for another dive with scientists studying the fish. Wes and the other divers entered the water early in the morning, proceeded to go to a reef about 1 mile or 1.6 kilometers out, 75 feet or 23 meters below the surface. Wes and the other divers were shooting when Wes signaled to them that he was going to go up to the surface because his camera was running out of space. Not long afterwards, the scientists swam by and noticed what looked to be a diver on the ocean floor. After going in for a closer look, they realized it was Wes laying on the ocean floor, near the reefs he was just filming, with his regulator out of his mouth. The divers tried frantically to retrieve his body and take him out of the water. They rushed him ashore, but EMTs were unable to revive him. He was then rushed to the nearest hospital, but due to the amount of time he was underwater, they were unable to save him. On July 21, 2010, Wesley Skiles was pronounced dead. He was 52 years old. When Wes died in a diving accident, news traveled fast among those who worked to protect and document Florida Springs, and also among some of the world's best divers. To those who knew him, and even those who knew just of him, the shock came from Wes dying during a routine open water dive in 75 feet of water, not back in some unexplored underwater cave miles below the Earth's surface. The coroner listed the cause of death as drowning, but that didn't explain much. The coroner was quoted as saying there was nothing to indicate natural causes or outside forces. While it was puzzling that a world-renowned diver would drown during what would be considered a routine dive, some of Wes's closest friends thought they knew what might have happened, while the other divers were on open circuit or using conventional air cylinders. Wes was using a rebreather, and the rebreather had somehow malfunctioned, and due to the buildup of carbon dioxide, Wes passed out from hypercapnia and drowned. It later came out that the rebreather he was using wasn't his, unlike open-circuit scuba gear, which vents expelled air into the water. A rebreather includes a counterlung that cleans expelled air, allowing a diver to rebreathe it. It also produces little to no bubbles. Bubbles tend to scare off fish. No bubbles meant better footage. The main risk with using a rebreather is if it's not properly configured, the carbon dioxide won't be scrubbed or bypassed altogether. It would essentially turn the rebreather into a plastic bag, with the oxygen levels dropping with every breath you take. They were comforted by the fact, at least they thought, he never knew what hit him. At least he didn't die in the back of some cave, lost or trapped, waiting for his air to run out, like so many of their friends. And while these were just theories and assumptions, the real question remains: what exactly happened to Wesley Skiles?
Wes was a dedicated person when it came to cave diving, and more so than just cave diving, it was about conservation and preservation of the water around here.
In 2016, Skiles' widow, Tarek Skiles, filed a lawsuit claiming that it was equipment failure which caused his death. When Wes died, he was using an Optima FX rebreather that he had borrowed. Tarek Skiles alleges in her lawsuit that due to an unexpected catastrophic failure of the rebreather, Wesley Skiles passed out underwater and died. According to the lawsuit, Tarek was aware of the serious quality control issues with the rebreather and had been warned that its oxygen control sensors were being damaged by unknown sources of moisture. that was allegedly leading to failures of the rebreather, with no warning to the users. The sensors were also unreliable and had been recalled by the supplier in 2007, and subsequent batches continued to contain defective sensors. Skiles also alleges a series of manufacturing failures by Dive-Right, including improper assembly of the rebreathers, poor design, failure to properly inspect and test the rebreathers before they were sold, and failure to investigate reports of safety concerns related to the rebreather. Terry Skiles alleges that despite knowing the defects and the associated risks, the defendants continued to tout the rebreather as a safe product, while making conscious efforts to suppress and conceal information about the known defects. Skiles says her ability to prove that Dive-Right and the other defendants were at fault had been significantly impaired by the destruction of evidence. Specifically, she alleges Dive-Right and Dive-Right Express used false pretenses to insert themselves in the medical examiner's inspection of the rebreather used by Wes. The lawsuit also alleges they were able to obscure evidence of the rebreather's failure in order to protect themselves from liability and protect their economic interests as marketers of the rebreather. Terry Skiles says in her lawsuit that Dive-Right owner Lamar Hires instructed Dive-Right Express owner Mark Derrick to interject himself in the medical examiner's investigation. Derrick allegedly made false statements to the medical examiner's office, representing himself as a neutral third party in the matter. Derrick then allegedly conducted an extremely flawed inspection that did not follow the strict protocols set forth by the Navy Experimental Dive Unit for the inspection of diving gear involved in the death of a diver. He allegedly also didn't photograph or videotape the inspection. He also allegedly minimized obvious signs of failure in his report, such as moisture in the electronics, and used ambiguous and subjective terms when documenting his observations, as to prevent the true conditions of the rebreather from being known. Derrick twice declined the request for comment about the allegations against him, saying only that the matter is under litigation. I'm looking forward to my day in court. Finally, the lawsuit alleges that once the medical examiner returned the rebreather to the diver that Wes had borrowed it from, Hires called that diver and instructed him to send the rebreather to Dive-Right so that it could be refurbished. Terry Skiles alleges that once the rebreather was back in Dive-Right's possession, Dive-Right replaced almost all of the parts, thus completing the destruction of any evidence left behind by Mark Derrick in Dive-Right Express. Lamar Hires and his attorney countered that there was no evidence of either a defect or a malfunction of the rebreather. Lamar Hires also said that he and Wes were friends, that dove together dozens, if not hundreds of times. Shortly before Wes's death, they went on a motorcycle trip together. After his death, Lamar and his family went to Wes's farm in High Springs to comfort his family. Lamar's attorney insisted that the rebreather did not malfunction, and instead Wes died because he was not trained or certified to use the optimal rebreather. It was not properly maintained, Wes misused the rebreather, he violated numerous safety rules common to diving, and he had taken both hydrocodone and Ambien prior to the fatal dive. This was confirmed by drug tests done after the accident. Although Terry rejected these claims and said that they were prescribed to Wes, since like many other divers, Terry said her husband suffered from joint pain caused by diving, specifically chronic pain from bubbles trapped in his left shoulder, as a result of getting bent on 5 of the over 7,000 dives he made during his career. On Friday, May 20th, 2016, after a 2.5-week trial, a jury in Palm Beach County, Florida deliberated for just 4 hours before rejecting the $25 million suit, finding that Dive-Right was not negligent for failing to test his product. The Optima was not defective, and Dive-Right did not fail to warn consumers of a defect in the rebreather.
It's the greatest groundwater system on Earth. There's not another aquifer on the planet like the Florida aquifer. We can make a difference. We can change the negative direction the water quality and quantity is going, but we just have to put a little effort into it.
Wes never considered himself an environmentalist. He always told people he was a conservationist. He loved to share what he learned from his experience. A friend of Wes shared he could have a business meeting planned, but if the surfing conditions were good in Jacksonville, he would go surfing. He very much believed in taking advantage of his opportunities. You could have a business meeting anytime. You couldn't always go surfing. Wes once said, everything we do on Earth's surface has a real direct connection to the water beneath our feet. We can do better, and I hope to do a story that shows directly that connection. Wes is survived by his wife Terry and their 2 children, Nathan and Tessa Skiles. On November 16, 2010, the State Park Division of the Florida Department of Environmental Protection renamed Peacock Springs Park in Wes's honor. And in 2011, he was awarded Nat Geo's Explorer of the Year with his longtime colleague and friend, Kenny Broad. One of the last shots taken of Wes was an underwater shot by legendary diver Joe Heinert. but the book Side Mount Profiles. She said even when he acted as a model, it was hard to tear that camera out of his hands. Prolific underwater photographer Stephen Frank said of Wes Skiles was the best there ever was at documenting the rare and wonderful underwater cave and cavern systems of the world. He was a technological innovator and a brilliantly creative image maker. He was a passionate advocate for Divers Alert Network and one of our most high-profile inspirations for both recreational and scientific diving. His friends, his family, and the whole dive community mourn his loss, yet we celebrate his many significant achievements. Thank you for watching.
My dad was like this little spark plug. Oh, he had every talent, focusing everybody in a single direction. This direction was this protection of the spray. This spray in general was, after his passing, I never needed any motivation. It was always still there, dropping me to do enjoy these sprays and
On August 30th, 2022, a group of 12 Russians would try and summit the peak of the Kluchevskaya Sopka volcano, located in the far east Russian peninsula of Kamchatka, what proceeded to happen would be one of the worst mountain climbing accidents in the country's history. Kluchevskaya Sopka, whose symmetrical cone towers high above the Kamchatka Peninsula, is part of the natural volcanoes of Kamchatka and a UNESCO World Heritage Site for its exceptional beauty. Long classified as top secret under the Soviet era, the Kamchatka region is slowly opening up to visitors and unveiling its hidden geysers and volcanoes. The volcanoes of Kamchatka, which includes Kluchevskaya Sopka, is a regionally protected area. The volcanoes are considered sacred by some of its indigenous communities. It's the tallest of 160 volcanoes that litter the range of snowy peaks. It's also the highest active volcano in Eurasia, with a peak height of 4,754 meters or 15,597 feet. It's also a favorite of climbers in the region. The volcano, which lies between the Sea of Okhotsk on the west and Pacific Ocean and Bering Sea on the east, erupted more than 50 times since the 1700s. Even without the dangers of an eruption, this climb is also particularly difficult, with the surface covered with volcanic rocks and additional risks of ice and rock falls. The conditions on the volcano are treacherous and unpredictable, with strong winds, cold temperatures, and snow at high altitudes. Near its peak, the volcano can get very cloudy, with temperatures at night dropping to minus 15 degrees Celsius or 5 degrees Fahrenheit. The wind chill can reach up to 15 meters per second or 33 miles per hour with heavy snowfall. All of these factors will lead to the accident at the top of the mountain. On August 30th, 2022, a group of 12 Russians, which included 2 experienced guides, set off on their journey to summit Kluchevskaya Sopka and its peak. The group was a mix of people from different parts of Russia and consisted of Pavel, Maxim, Yekaterina, Andrei, Alexander, Evgeny, Anastasia, Roman, and guides Ivan and Andrei. It would be a long climb that would take 10 days to trek up and down the mountain. After 2 days, they would eventually reach a camp at an altitude of 3,300 meters or 10,826 feet, where they would stay in order to get acclimatized. After spending a few days getting acclimatized, the 12 climbers got ready and proceeded to continue the climb to the peak on the morning of September 3rd. Shortly after leaving camp, 2 of the climbers weren't feeling well, so one of the guides, Ivan Alabugin, accompanied them back to camp while the other guide, Andrei Mishenko, continued the excursion with the other 8 climbers. After trekking the side of the mountain for a few hours, on the afternoon of September 3rd, 2022, at an altitude of 4,158 meters, or 13,641 feet, the group came to a point where they would have to make their way around a section of the slope with a sharp drop on one side. They proceeded to cross the section while being tied together by a single long rope. From the information gathered, this is where tragedy struck. While attempting to cross, one of the climbers lost their footing and began to fall, dragging the rest of the group down with them. The height of the fall isn't known, but it's been reported that around 5 of the climbers died instantly due to the fall, while the others hit their head and lost consciousness. The guide, Andrei, broke a leg and was unable to move. He would eventually radio down to Ivan, where he would notify him of the accident. Ivan would quickly prepare to trek up the mountain to assist the survivors. He would bring with him a few sleeping bags, a tent, and a first aid kit. Climbing from 3,300 meters to almost 4,200 wouldn't be easy, and he worried as it would take him several hours to reach them. During his climb, the survivors would succumb to their injuries and the harsh environment surrounding them. In the end, all 9 of the climbers died by the time Ivan reached them, with sources saying that Andrei was the last one to perish. When Ivan arrived and realized there was no one to save, he had no choice but to abandon the bodies and make his way back down to camp, where the only other survivors, Anastasia and Roman, were waiting. Using a satellite phone, they were able to call the Ministry of Emergency in the Kamchatka region to inform them of the accident. They informed them that they had enough food and fuel to last several days. They were also able to contact their relatives using the satellite phone and say that they were healthy and in good spirits. An extensive search and rescue would be launched to not only rescue their survivors, but also recover the bodies that now lay 4,200 meters high on the mountain. Complicating the issue is the potential of a storm that is set to arrive at the mountain on September 6, 3 days after the accident. Even with that in mind, the search and rescue operation began. In the early morning of September 4th, 2022, information about the emergency was immediately transferred to the Regional Department of the Ministry of Emergency Situations. A consolidated group of 24 search and rescue climbers were dispatched and arrived at the Ust-Kamchatsky region. The group was mainly made up of 15 search and rescue employees of the Ministry of Emergencies and 9 advanced rescue climbers from the Kamchatka Rescue Center. A mix of 5 search and rescue employees and 4 from the rescue center, along with doctors, set off to reach the survivors by a Russian Mi-8 helicopter. The rest of the group set off on foot. It would take them 2 days of climbing to reach the survivors. Rescuers tried on Monday, September 5th, to reach the survivors in the cabin at 3,300 meters where they were sheltering. They were forced to abort the mission after multiple attempts to land the helicopter failed due to heavy cloud cover and gale force winds that reached up to 30 meters per second, or 67 miles per hour. Although the 2 attempts were made a few hours apart, the wind never died down. The rescue team realized that landing the helicopter would be more difficult than expected. To make matters worse, the heavy snowfall that was expected started to fall. According to weather forecasts, on September 6, a cyclone would approach the peninsula from the Sea of Ahas. The winds will intensify and the snow will mix with rain, which will further complicate the work of the rescuers. But on the 4th attempt, despite the strong winds and heavy snow causing near zero visibility, the helicopter was able to land at 7:30 in the morning, Moscow time, but only at 1,663 meters, or 5,456 feet, meaning the rescue team will still need to climb up to reach the survivors. After some time, both the ground team and the 9 climbers will make it to the cabin and reach the survivors, where they would receive some medical care. As the storm intensified, the survivors and the rescue team would have to wait out a portion of the storm, and on Wednesday, September 7th, 2022, a 5th helicopter attempt was made, and it successfully landed at 3,300 meters after conditions on the mountain improved. The survivors were then evacuated from the top of the mountain, where they were transported to the nearest settlement, the village of Kluchi, in the Ust-Kamchatka district, before being evacuated to Petropavlovsk to receive proper medical attention. While all 3 climbers are in good health, the surviving guide, Ivan, has frostbite on his hand and feet. An attempt to retrieve the body was made by helicopter, going to an altitude of 4,158 meters. After 2 passes, the bodies of all 9 climbers were recovered. The incident received national attention, and eventually Russia's investigative committee, a federal agency, opened a criminal case against the organizers of the excursion, under the article causing death by negligence to 2 or more persons. The travel club Extreme Time is not new to the tourism market. They organize trips to Altai, Kamchatka, Baikal, Crimea, and even Nepal. One of the guides, Andrei, became interested in mountain climbing in 2001 when he served in the North Caucasus. He worked in the Novosibirsk company for more than 5 years and had extensive climbing experience, having climbed numerous mountains as well as multiple trips to Kamchatka. He summited Kluchevskaya Sopka 13 times. Ivan is also an experienced guide, having been with Extreme Time for 8 years. He participated in trekking in Nepal, Turkey, Crimea, and Baikal. although Extreme Time pointed out that there are no marked trails at the top, and the terrain often changes due to the high volcanic activity. Well-known climber Denis Keselov explains that the ascent itself is considered easy, including for beginners. However, much of it depends on the guides. He emphasized that in commercial mountaineering, the routes themselves are less difficult. If a person is properly trained and equipped, then the risks are minimized, although no one is immune from accidents. The weather may have also played a big role. Perhaps the instructors couldn't cope with the harsh conditions. There were also a lot of people in the group, and with only 2 guides for 10 people, it was difficult to keep track of everyone. Keselov also suggested that maybe they neglected security measures. Since the path isn't difficult during the ascent, novice climbers could group up and not properly attach their ropes to the terrain, meaning if one stumbled and fell, it would also pull the group down with them. If the climber was properly attached to the rock face, this would be prevented. In addition, Kluchevskaya Sopka is known for its rockfalls. This could be another reason for the tragedy. The prosecutor's office will now check the safety compliance of the travel club against established tourism legislation and how carefully they follow the requirements for the guided excursions. They will find out if the group was registered with the Ministry of Emergency Situations before the ascent. According to preliminary information, the organizers did. The prosecutor's office added, if there are grounds, prosecutorial response measures will be taken. The director and founder of the company, Andrei Stepanov, that organized the tour to the Kluchevskaya volcano, was detained. No other information on the status of the case or the charges against him have been released. After the backlash of the accident, the governor of Kamchatka, Vladimir Solodov, told Russian state media that after the tragedy, and with the death of 9 tourists on the Kluchevskaya Sopka volcano, he sent a report to Russian President Vladimir Putin, with proposals to transfer the section of the natural park to the federal level to strengthen safety protocols. And proposals were also being prepared for the systemic regulation of what he calls extreme tourism. He noted that there is also a need to strengthen the level of control, especially protected natural areas at the regional level like the volcanoes of Kamchatka. This is still an extremely new accident, and I will update the video in the description below with any new information that comes out. Thank you for watching.